So coming off the previous chapter, we saw that Shigaraki was able to graze Izuku's face, and just by doing this, he was able to take one of the quirks of One for All, and that being Danger Sense. Coming into this chapter, we're seeing how that happened. So the Vestiges were essentially talking amongst themselves, like how to deal with Shigaraki, how the thing they're most worried about is his regeneration and how they should deal with it, until suddenly Shigaraki's hand like enters the Vestige world. This is like, with him grazing Izuku. And the fourth user, Shinomori, has Danger Sense. I mean, like at this point, he is like the embodiment of the quirk. Therefore, he can like activate it himself. And doing this, he sensed that the hand was coming to basically take all of them. Like Shigaraki was about to take One for All as a whole. Because I guess that's what happens if you just grab all of the Vestiges at once. But since Shinomori was able to see it coming, he was able to push the other Vestiges out of the way and sacrifice himself so that only he was grabbed, which is a pretty cool sequence. I mean, it would have been better if it was N, of course, because smoke is like the most unnecessary quirk that Izuku would need to go against Shigaraki at this point, but that's neither here nor there. It would just be too good. The stakes need to be raised at some point, and this is a great way to do that. And also Shigaraki has the necessary hatred that All for One, built up in him his whole life so that he could bypass the failsafe in One for All, something that was preventing All for One himself from stealing it all these years. And then once Shigaraki has Danger Sense, he's like, oh, so this is the power passed down through generations. My master had a hard time trying to steal it. Whatever, I couldn't care less, but it'll make killing you easier, so I like this. It's giving Shigaraki his own identity. He is not like All for One. I mean, they actually hammer that home later on in this chapter. Because when Shigaraki starts destroying everything, we come back to the Vestige world and talking to Yoichi's like, at this point, he's not All for One successor. He lives for the joy of breaking it all. He's destruction incarnate. So it's like Horikoshi telling us Shigaraki is the main villain. He's not just a rehash of All for One. He's not even a successor at this point. Two entirely different people, guys. Yes, he has All for One's quirk, but he's not him. They are different. And, I appreciate it because All for One was obviously obsessed with getting One for All from Yoichi, but Shigaraki doesn't really care. It's more so just an accessory that can help him at this point. He's more concerned with just destroying everything. So now Izuku is seriously at a disadvantage because he needed Danger Sense to fight against him. He needs to see those strikes from Shigaraki coming because if you just get touched by him once, he'll either take your quirk or decay you, or even both. So in order to compensate for that, Izuku is using Black Whip, Fajin, and Gear Shift to make the black chains. We saw him use this before, but now he's using it kind of like Doc Ock style. But it's still not good enough because now that Shigaraki himself has Danger Sense, he's able to avoid the strikes just the way that Izuku was. And he goes after Izuku and knocks him. But I guess Izuku, wrapping himself in the black chains, forms this ball around him, which allows him to survive, getting blasted Dragon Ball Z style across the landscape here. While this is happening, Shigaraki's like, you're stuck in the past, Midoriya. You were crying. I won't pretend I didn't see you. Are you still treating me as a human? Open your eyes. That's not who I am anymore. So yes, while Shigaraki Tomura is the incarnate of destruction here, and he's just a mindless psychopath, there still is the aspect of Tenko Shimura, who he originally was within him, which Izuku essentially knows through, quirkery, but that's what Izuku is trying to get through to Shigaraki here. He knows that he can't save Shigaraki, but he can save Tenko. Then after Izuku recovers, he turns around and he sees that they're very close to Mount Fuji. And this is going to be the ticking clock going further into the end of the series, I suppose, because obviously if Shigaraki destroys Mount Fuji, it's going to be a catastrophic destruction of lava everywhere. I don't even want to know what would happen if Mount Fuji actually erupted in real life, let alone in this series getting destroyed by Decay. But afterwards, we get some exposition from the second user here. I think his name was Bruce, right? And he clarifies that Shigaraki only stole the quirk of Danger Sense itself, but he obviously didn't take One for All. And also taking one of the quirk factors from the main quirk factor of One for All doesn't weaken you. You just kind of lose access to the Danger Sense. So Izuku still has the superhuman strength or just the ultra power that comes with One for All from the power stockpiler. Something interestingly enough that was first cultivated by Shinomori. He was like the first guy to see that it was abusable and you can grind it out and become ultra powerful that way. And of course, it ultimately came down to All Might being the one who really made it the powerhouse that it is today. Like, no one could have gotten this far if it wasn't for All Might. Let us not forget that. I mean, All Might basically won. It was just Horikoshi's plot that allowed All for One to come back. But the Vestiges start considering that, hey, maybe he should just run away because Shigaraki's too powerful at this point and we can't afford to have One for All stolen. And this is understandable because this is literally what they've been doing for the last 100 years. They've been running away from All for One. You know, they'll fight him here and there and then they run away because it's more important to make sure that One for All is kept and not taken. Or, you know, killed and dissipates or whatever. But we know that Izuku's not going to run away. He's, you know, the main character of this series. There's no way that he could just run away. Especially now that we're at the end. And this is for sure the final battle. Yeah, I would be surprised if he straight up runs away. I mean, it would be nice if he does because he still needs to recover. He is approaching the point of complete exhaustion, you know, using gear shift and everything. But it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And while it would be smart, of course, it would make Izuku look a little cowardly. And then after this, Shigaraki reveals that he can see the Vestige ghosts. He's like, I can see you there, ghost. Are you discussing why you should run away? So that's really cool. And I guess he could see them now because he has a part of the quirk within him, you know, taking danger sense. But also this allows him to be able to communicate with Nana rather than having to steal the float quirk, which I still think is a possibility. Like I talked about this before. Now that Shigaraki can take individual quirk factors here or vestiges, you know, it could lead to him taking them one by one until he takes like Nana. And, you know, Nana is the grandmother of Shigaraki. And they still kind of need to have their heart-to-heart, one-on-one, you know, conversation, which I'm pretty sure they haven't had yet. And that could give us more insight into Shigaraki's backstory, which we have most of it. And we have about 95% of it. We just need to see All for One giving him Decay as a child, which still hasn't been revealed yet. And I think Nana can lead to that revelation possibly. But going further, Shigaraki's like, there's going to be no place left to run. By the end, it'll be a giant wasteland, just like what Spinner wanted. Love that Shigaraki's staying true to his boy here. Shigaraki and Spinner have like this cool little bromance, which I'm a fan of because, you know, they relate to each other. They were both outcasts, both very trauma-filled childhoods, both gamers, both hikikomoris, and Spinner was like the first person who was ride or die for Shigaraki. And I talked about this in my spoilers video, but Shigaraki wasn't always like the alpha chadlord that he is now. He started off as like kind of pathetic and was straight up called a man-child. And he didn't really start to become the psychopathic lord of destruction that he is now until My Villain Academia. And Spinner was like the first one to realize that, oh yeah, he is like him. So I'm going to get behind him. Kind of like, you know, he's going to be the pirate king and I want to be on his crew. So I like that Shigaraki's like reciprocating the feelings to Spinner. Like still in this moment, he has him in the back of his mind. Then Shigaraki, of course, threatens to destroy Mount Fuji. And the Vestiges are like, no, you know, we can't let him do that because there's going to be lava everywhere. So like I said, that's activating the ticking clock here. If we didn't already have like a few of them before, especially with UA falling, which I think is still being held up by Gentle. I don't really remember the update that we got on that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Izuku is going to have to come in and grab that thing and land it, kind of like the ending of Sky High. I also want to make a video talking about how Horikoshi was super heavily influenced by both Sky High and Avatar: The Last Airbender to make My Hero Academia. But coming into the end of the chapter, Izuku like regains his wits. And it goes back to what I was saying. Shigaraki, I mean, literally is like a human, but he means more so like the Tenko aspect of him is human and that he was inherently innocent. So now we're going to see Izuku continuing to fight against Shigaraki and trying to get through to break out that Tenko aspect of him. And that's basically how he could win. So we're continuing the final battle between DEKU and Shigaraki here, because in the previous chapter, Shigaraki was able to take the fourth user's quirk Danger Sense from him. So now DEKU is at a big disadvantage, also considering that Shigaraki is targeting Mount freaking Fuji to destroy with Decay. And we see that Shigaraki has launched a Decay tidal wave at Izuku,
but Izuku stands in front of it, about to launch a counterattack, but we see that he has been using Black Whip underneath his skin, wrapping directly around the muscle itself as like a brace so that he can keep fighting. I mean, we've seen Izuku do this type of thing throughout the series, but this is like the ultimate example of it. In fact, it says he's doing it unconsciously. So while he's also doing this, his big counterattack to this Decay tidal wave is Maximum Fa Jin, which is the third user's quirk, building up kinetic energy for one big movement, but the maximum version of it. Like, we're going Jujutsu Kaisen rules here. And he's combining that with a Delaware Smash. So it just makes this huge gust of wind pressure, like blowing everything away, successfully saving Mount Fuji in the process, but also destroying all of the ground and anything that was targeted in the path of Shigaraki's Decay, because we know that it spreads now. And he just blows Shigaraki away in the process. And he's like, "You're clever, Midoriya." But Shigaraki could just keep doing it. It's not like he's stopped here. He can just keep touching the ground and keep, activating Decay and going after Mount Fuji, which he tries to do, because as he's coming down from being blown away, he suddenly sees smoke everywhere, because he originally thought it was just a dust cloud, but no, it's actually Izuku using the 6th user's quirk, Smoke Screen, in combination with the low gear of Gear Shift, the 2nd user's, which makes it last longer. And he's doing this in an attempt to disrupt Shigaraki's danger sense, because he realizes that it's not like a perfect quirk. Like, it is based off of Spider Sense, but it's not as broken and reliable as Spider Sense actually is. It can malfunction if you, disrupt it enough with, I guess, sensory overload to an extent, which he figured out in his battle against Nagan. So using the smoke screen, he's able to do that, and he's attacking through the smoke screen with Black Whip, using them like tentacles. This is like a really cool sequence. I love when Horikoshi does this stuff with Izuku, like synergistically using all of his quirks together. It's just some of the best moments of the series, in my opinion. And doing this, he's bypassing Shigaraki's danger sense and is able to successfully get the jump on him, comes through the smoke screen and punches off Shigaraki's freaking arm. However, Shigaraki still has a contingency to all of this, because he still has the search quirk. This quirk came from Ragdoll. When All For One took it from her, I think way back in the beginning of season 3, that quirk is pretty busted looking back on it now, because it allows her to know everything about a person that she looks at, like their location and even their freaking weaknesses, and she could do it for up to 100 people at a time. So this allows Shigaraki to see Izuku through the smoke screen here, and he tries to attack him with the Black All For One tendril quirk thing, but on top of that, he finally sees everything that is affecting Izuku here, and he's like, "You can't breathe, can you?" And on top of that, he can also see the Black Whip underneath his skin, creating a brace around his muscles. But Shigaraki saying that "Hey, you can't breathe here" is in reference to Gear Shift, because Banjo, the 5th user, he's like, "Gear Shift's over and the recoil's kicking in." Because we found out, I think it was last year when Izuku was fighting against All For One, when we first found out about Gear Shift, he was using it on himself and altering himself down to a molecular level, using the Gear Shift on his freaking cells. So he was becoming Ultra Super Saiyan, but he can only do it for 15 minutes or 5 minutes, something like that. I knew there was a 5 in there. And then after that time limit ran out, he was essentially going to pass out from the stress. And I guess we finally got to that point now. And he can't even breathe properly. I mean, I guess he's breathing, but I don't know, forcing himself to do it, if that makes sense. So eventually, he is going to completely gas out and stop moving. But after that, Shigaraki's like, "That attack from before. It's not something you can keep using non-stop. Honestly, an attack like that could have caused me some trouble. You just have too much you need to protect Midoriya." So he's referring to when he came out through the smoke screen and punched Shigaraki's arm off. At that moment in time, on paper, Izuku could have killed Shigaraki. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's multiple times throughout this fight, throughout this arc, that Izuku could have already killed Shigaraki. He's clearly strong enough to be able to do it. He could just punch his head off if he wanted to. Think about it. He could easily punch his head off instead of his arm. We've come to this final battle in the series, And it's not like the typical final battle where like the hero is like at a huge disadvantage and he kind of needs to like have this talk no jutsu or this power of friendship to be able to get this random power up or this random ability to be able to overcome the villain. It's like, no, he already has all the power he needs and he can kill the villain. He's just choosing not to because he wants to save him. Because in response to what Shigaraki said, Izuku's like, you know, I won't give up on that crying boy, referring to Tenko, you know, who Shigaraki originally was as a child. Because we've also seen that there's like this fragment of his personality or a vestige. It's not fully explained, but there's something within Shigaraki that is manifested as Tenko being like restrained. And Izuku can see it the same way that Shigaraki can see the vestiges in Izuku. And in response to that, Shigaraki's like, everyone sees the world through their own lens. All you're trying to do is unravel me through your own pathetic lens. And it's like, as a creator, that really is hitting home, if you get my drift. But he says, look carefully. You should be able to notice it, that little boy stopped crying a long time ago. He changed the lens through which he sees the world and turned into Tomura Shigaraki. There's no suffering left inside me. And where Tenko was is now just like almost like a Chibaku Tensei from Naruto with like all of this rubble packed into this hole. This could be Horikoshi like showing us that age-old saying of like, you know, you can't fill a hole if you just keep putting things in there. Like there's still going to be a hole, you know, inside of you as a person. So I don't think Tenko is actually gone. It's just that instead of the All for One hands holding him back as they were originally, I think now that All for One is dead, Shigaraki himself has plugged in this hole with like debris covering up Tenko. But I'm pretty sure he's still there. To Nana, the 7th user of One for All, also Shigaraki's grandmother, inside of Izuku, and she's like, give up. Izuku, some people can't be saved. He represents the biggest wall in the way of your heroism, and it's fine if you can't overcome it. Just friggin' kill him. Finish him with a single powerful attack. It's okay. Store more energy than you ever have before. Just kill him. And like I was saying, Izuku can do this, but he's just not going to. And he's like, you know, if it was that easy, the pain from the past wouldn't be bothering the both of you so much. Which is true. It's like it's still bothering Shigaraki no matter how cool he's trying to play it. And it's also bothering Nana. Like, she definitely wants him to be saved, but at this point she's lost all hope and she feels that the lesser of two evils is just freaking killing the ultimate evil here, which I agree with for sure. But, you know, Izuku has unrequited altruism. He is like too much of a hero to his own detriment. He's essentially like a Disney-fied version of what All Might was. Because All Might's not afraid to kill. I mean, he is ultimate justice, and he will save, but if he needs to, he will freaking kill. Like, he popped All for One's head and literally killed him. Izuku, not so much. And going further, Izuku, in response to what he was just saying about it bothering them, he's like, if it was swept under the rug, and then we see like this flashback to when Shigaraki was fighting Izuku in the first war, when he's like, you pretended not to see those you couldn't protect and swept their pain under the rug. That was more so a statement against all heroes, because that is partly true, especially in this world, and even in our own to an extent, actually to a large extent, depending on where you live. But he's also referring to like his childhood and how no one helped him, you know, when he had his big tragedy happen. But it's more so, you know, just a commentary on hero society in general as well. It's like, yeah, they can protect and save and be seen as these glorious saviors and heroes, but the ones that they couldn't protect, they just, you know, we didn't see it. It's just swept under the rug. But Izuku's like, nah, I won't stop fighting until I've shredded that rug with my own hands. And it's like, yeah, I am the real hero. I'm going to save everyone. And I'm not going to turn a blind eye to a single person. It's like, yeah, Izuku is the ultimate hero with unrequited altruism. Like, he's even surpassing Tanjiro finally, because at least Tanjiro was killing people. Like, Tanjiro from Demon Slayer, while he does have a very polarizing personality, he's still a freaking murderer. Izuku, again, not so much. So I think Izuku might win the award for like the cleanest Shonen Jump MC ever. But going more into that, the second user is like, you know, that's why I opposed him. It's like he wanted us to devote our efforts to save our mortal enemy. And it's like, at first I thought he was a peace-seeking fool, but then I looked into his memories and I finally understood. And it's like, also, wait, the Vestiges can look into the memories of their host? That's kind of an invasion of privacy, but whatever. And he's like, this boy doesn't give up on anyone. Even the boy he should hate, referring to Bakugo, or a fellow quirkless person, he always chose to believe in the heart, deep inside of them. And it's like, yeah, that's Izuku. Like, he's not going to kill Shigaraki. He's going to keep fighting until he saves him or saves Tenko. And in the final moments of the chapter, we suddenly see Star and Stripe's hand pointing. And it looks like she's inside of the All for One Vestige world. And it's like, how is this happening? Because Star and Stripe was like vaporized, right? After Shigaraki / All for One took her quirk, we saw her Vestige inside of the All for One world, like rebelling and fighting off the other quirk factor vestiges within him and destroying some of them, like taking some quirks from him. But we thought that she was gone, but maybe there's like a remnant of her left or something, because the second user and All Might's Vestige Ghost somehow are able to see this? So are they seeing like a phantom of a vestige? Or is this not even like a real thing that's happening and it's kind of just them thinking on the fly of like, wait, Star and Stripe was able to rebel within All for One, so maybe that's the plan here. Because in the last panel, the second user talking to Izuku is like, boy, do as I say, we are betting on you. You have to let go of One for All. And we see the moment of when Izuku, I think, finds out that All Might was nerfed, like back in the very beginning of the first season, like when he's bowing in front of him crying. So what I think this means is that they want Izuku to give Shigaraki One for All. Like, hey, give him what he wants. This is how we can beat him, because maybe once he has One for All inside of him, the Vestiges can rebel the way that Star and Stripe did, and they can kill him from the inside out. And even once they're inside of that Vestige world, maybe that's when they can get through to Tenko, like get through that rubble possibly. And also, this is a great way for Nana to finally talk to Shigaraki, because Tenko really did admire Nana. Like, he would look at pictures of her and stuff, and it was his dad who like abused him because of that. Now, also, if this does happen and Shigaraki is rendered quirkless, or if they're able to destroy the All for One quirk factor from within, he's not powerless at that point. He still has like the quirk singularity body, because we saw that when Aizawa was turning off his quirk during the initial battle at the beginning of this arc, he still was super powerful and could do the Tetsuo body stuff. So I don't think Izuku can fight him quirkless, unless I'm missing something here. But there's going to be some craziness going on, and I still do think that this will end with Izuku getting both One for All and All for One. But man, things are getting really interesting now, especially if he does give him One for All, which it seems like it's going to happen. Or maybe he gets it back after he gives it to him, after they like sabotage him from the inside. Maybe he gets One for All back, possibly, and then finishes him off. Not really sure. So in this chapter, Izuku goes completely feral against Shigaraki in an attempt to end the fight once and for all by essentially force-feeding him One for All, or at least an aspect of it. And I'll get into exactly what is going on with that, but in the previous chapter we saw that Izuku was adapting to fighting against Shigaraki without the use of his Danger Sense quirk that was taken by Shigaraki. We also saw at the end of that chapter, Star and Stripe somehow came out of nowhere in the All for One Vestige world, but also somehow in All Might's consciousness, pointing out that there is a void inside of Shigaraki that is containing the former essence of his original Tenko self. Now that All for One is gone, you know, the one who was originally holding Tenko back, it is now Shigaraki himself doing it. And it turns out that there's, like I said, some kind of fragment, or as they refer to it as in this chapter, an ember of Star and Stripe left out there in the All for One / One for All Vestige universe, and is able to see a fragment that was broken in this debris Chibaku Tensei thing that Shigaraki has made to hold back his former child self in Tenko Shimura. And like I said, All Might is able to see this, which is wild because technically he should have no trace of One for All left at this point. He used it all of his quote-unquote embers, as that was also referred to, in using the United States of Smash against All for One way back in Season 3. And also, aside from that, Star and Stripe should be gone completely as well, since her tangible form was killed by Shigaraki with Decay, but also as he took her quirk from her, her quirk vestige was also killed in the All All for One Vestige world. But somehow, as it says here, the will of heroism was inherited, and there's still an ember of her in this world, and somehow the quirk Wi-Fi is connecting to All Might and Shigaraki. To be honest, in my opinion, this is just Horikoshi trying to make up for straight up wasting Star and Stripe, in my opinion. I think he realized that he fumbled such a great character, and he's trying to make the most use of her without seeming like it was, like I said, wasted. So it has to be like, yeah, she still has importance, guys. She's still doing stuff. Because her importance here is apparently that the damage that she did to Shigaraki / All for One, or the All for One quirk itself, when she was like rebelling against it within the All for One Vestige world, formed a wound inside of his mind, consciousness, as they say, a mental wound. And he can't regenerate this like he would his flesh. It can't be repaired with quirks, apparently. So this is like the last ray of hope, showing that there is still an element of Tenko within Shigaraki, and this is how Izuku essentially wants to defeat Shigaraki, by saving him, by bringing out the innocent Tenko Shimura within him. Now, how is he going to do that? I don't know. I mean, I talked about this a lot before. We saw it in I think it was like the intro to season 6, where Shigaraki just dissolves and then Tenko like comes out of him. And a great way of practically doing this within the realistic rules of the My Hero universe would simply just be Eri using her rewind quirk on Shigaraki and then just turning him back into Tenko. But how do we get from point A to point B with that? I don't know. They bring Eri out onto the ground zero apocalyptic battlefield, which seems unlikely. So I guess Izuku is just going to be able to do some kind of Deus Ex quirkery in the last few chapters here, possibly. But maybe there's another way that they do it, and I'll get more into that. But aside from that, we're finding out what the second user's plan is for defeating Shigaraki, because he insinuated at the end of the previous chapter that he wanted Izuku to let go of One for All. And we were speculating, like, what does that mean? Is he just going to give him the entire quirk factor and just let him have at it, and then maybe they're going to fight him from the inside? And yes and no. The second user's plan is to give him just a portion of One for All, like a part of the quirk factor. Because we saw, previously that Shigaraki was able to take a single quirk from One for All, such as Danger Sense, the fourth user. And when he took that, he essentially fully assimilated it and was able to use Danger Sense without any drawbacks. And that has them worried, such as the sixth user, N here, who is like protesting to the second user's plan of giving himself to Shigaraki. But the more that he goes into the plan, I really like it. And it does make sense, but it also feels like Horikoshi is cheating and breaking his own rules. And I'll get into that. But the plan here is that since Izuku has been using Gear Shift for like the last year and a half in real time in the story, or at least for us, but in the story, I don't know, it's been like 15 minutes or something. Since he's been using it that long, it's now having the recoil effect on him. Gear Shift, he uses it on himself and amplifies all of the cells in his body individually. So now he's like an ultra super saiyan, and he can just defy the laws of physics, essentially. Like in that incredible sequence that he had last year against All for One / Shigaraki. One of my favorite, if not my most favorite, sequence in this entire final war. But that came with a price, and it is this recoil that Izuku is experiencing, where he can't really move anymore. He can barely even breathe, and he's holding himself together by using the fifth user's Black Whip quirk. However, there is a way to stop this and get the second user wants to give the Gear Shift aspect of the One for All quirk factor to Shigaraki forcibly. And if he does that, in theory, Izuku will no longer feel the recoil of Gear Shift, since he will no longer have that quirk factor. But if he gives it to Shigaraki, then Shigaraki himself will suffer from the recoil. And that is very cool, and I like it. But like I said, it just feels like this is like cheating. I don't really think this is how it would have worked a couple years ago if Horikoshi was writing this sequence. It just seems like he's kind of bending the rules and changing it so that he can make this sequence more exciting, I suppose. And this is like a nitpick. I totally get it. But that's just how I feel about this. It ultimately doesn't really matter because it is Horikoshi's story and he can do whatever he wants. But like I said, I just don't feel like this would have been the case a couple years ago. It seems like the rules of quirk exchanging have altered. But still pretty cool, and I'm on board with it anyway. And the second user is positing all of this because he says, after absorbing All for One's consciousness, Shigaraki became too strong. As you are now, referring to Izuku, you're no match for him. That's why we have to attack from the inside. And that's just cap. Izuku proved that he is more than enough match for him. Like, he could have killed him multiple times in this fight, but he's choosing not to. It's like the second user is kind of like creating a false narrative here just so he can be the one who saves the day. Like I pointed it out in my previous review that Izuku can just pop Shigaraki's head at any second. Like he has more than enough power to be able to do that, but you know, Izuku is like the golden MC. He can't murder, even like the end-all be-all apocalyptic villain here. He has to save him via, I don't know, pulling Tenko out of him in some way. So this is a way that Izuku can have his cake and eat it too, along with the Vestiges. Force feed Shigaraki the gear shift element of the quirk factor from One for All, so that he will, in theory, like I said, feel the recoil from gear shift the way that Izuku is right now, and he won't be able to move as well. I mean, I'm sure he could still do something. I'm sure he has some kind of quirk that will allow him to puppeteer himself the way that Izuku is with Black Whip. But also, the second user will be able to fight Shigaraki from within him, like in the All for One Vestige world. And I think that's really cool because we haven't really seen these Vestiges fight before. I mean, we've seen them do things here and there in the flashbacks, but we've never seen like an extended fight with them or how they fight or what they do. And I think this is a great way for Horikoshi to finally give them all like their one last moment, because they have been here fighting with Izuku, just, you know, behind Izuku's mental wall in the One for All Vestige world. And I just don't think it's going to be that simple, of course. It can't just end there. It's like, oh yeah, just the second user gets transferred to him, and he's the one who fights Shigaraki when in the Mind All for One Vestige world, and then everyone else just chills back and watches. It's like, no. I think one by one, all of the Vestiges are going to go into Shigaraki, into the All for One Quirk Factor Vestige world, and they're all going to eventually fight him. And I say that because, I mean, it just seems logical, but also Nana Shimura, the seventh user, she is Shigaraki's grandmother. And Tenko, as a child, really admired her, but he was chastised by his father because she kind of abandoned Shigaraki's father because she didn't want him to be a target of All for One. And he just turned into a big piece of crap, you know, easily the worst character in the series. We all hate him. All my homies hate Shigaraki's dad. And of course, he is large in part the reason why Shigaraki became the way that he is, aside from All for One, you know, doing the grooming that he did. But that would be a great way for Shigaraki to finally have his moment with Nana, and for a way for all of the other Vestiges to be able to fight against Shigaraki in this one big final battle, and aside from just Izuku doing it. And then I guess that will ultimately leave Izuku with just the base power stockpiler / quirk transfer aspect of what One for All is, like the base of it, before Banjo came out and revealed that you're going to get all of the quirks from the previous users of it, you know, when times were much simpler. So I think that's how the next couple chapters are going to play out here, but coming into the end of the chapter, we see that that is what Izuku is going to do. He's gearing up to force feed Shigaraki, the second user's quirk, and he goes completely feral. Like, he looks like even more villainous than he did during the quote-unquote Dark Deku arc. Like, he has his shirt off, and he has the Black Whip tendrils coming out of him. His fingers are now claw-like, and Shigaraki is even, like, noticing it. And he's like, wow, looking at you, I never guessed you're a hero. And how is he going to force feed the One for All quirk factor to him, or at least the second user's gear shift aspect of it? I think it would be pretty cool if he like stabs him with one of the Black Whip tendrils and then like transfers it that way, because I guess you just need to have them ingest your DNA, and we do know that One for All can forcibly be given. It's not like you have to just be like, yes, I accept this. It's like, no, you must accept it. So I think he can either do that, or he's gonna stab him with his hand or something, because we see this glimmer of light on Izuku's hand in the very final panel of the chapter. And that could be signifying that he is going to do it that way, because he does have blood on his hands, right? And that is DNA. So expect that to happen. I'm really looking forward to seeing the next couple of fights within the Vestige world here, with the previous users of One for All taking on Shigaraki within, but also breaking through that barrier, that Chibaku Tensei of lead that he made to suppress Tenko. They're going to be excavating through that to pull little Tenko out of there. And it's like, even if you pull him out of there, it's like, what happens? Does he just take over Shigaraki's consciousness and then he's in Shigaraki's body? Not really sure. I mean, we will find out in the next couple chapters, I suppose. But so Izuku finally transfers the second user's quirk to Shigaraki, which causes this chain of events that causes them to both merge memories and relive moments throughout the series. But we'll get to that because quite a few things happened beforehand. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. So, we're coming off of the previous chapter where we saw Izuku can barely move anymore because of the recoil from this second user's quirk, Gear Shift. He's been using it so much that now he has finally reached the point of full exhaustion and he can't really move his body anymore. That's why he's using Black Whip to the full extent, wrapping around his arms, not only on his dermal level, but also intramuscularly. He is wrapping Black Whip around his muscles, and this is how he's moving around, like essentially puppeteering his own body with this quirk. And it was decided that they were going to transfer the quirks of One For All individually to Shigaraki in order to defeat him from the inside out. Because in the previous chapter, somehow, some way, there is like a fragment of the soul or the vestige of Star and Stripe, somehow still there in the ether, pointed out that there is still an aspect within Shigaraki's consciousness that represents Tenko, who originally Shigaraki was as a child. And prying this true, I guess you could say, or inherent, innate personality from Shigaraki is the way that you can defeat him without killing him, I guess, right? That's the plan. I mean, that's at least what was showed to us in the intro of season 6. Like, at some point, I don't know if it's literally going to happen, but in one way or another, they're going to, like, dissipate Shigaraki as a being, and then Tenko will come through. I don't know. But it's going to happen some way or another. Like, that's what Izuku is doing here, because he doesn't want to kill Shigaraki. So their plan is to break through the barrier that is keeping this aspect of Tenko hidden away. So they're going to transfer the vestiges to Shigaraki so that they can do it within him. And we know that, he can take the vestiges or the quirks of One For All individually, because a couple chapters back, he took Danger Sense from Izuku, therefore taking the fourth user's vestige as well, since that quirk belonged to him. But another variable of giving Shigaraki these quirks, especially the second user's quirk, Gear Shift, is so that it can take the exhaustion and the recoil from Izuku and give it to Shigaraki. Since the quirk has been used, once you transfer that quirk factor to another person, then they will have the recoil as if they themselves used the quirk. I know, it's kind of cheating, but it is what it is. But regardless, Izuku can't really use Gear Shift anymore because, like we said, he's experienced the recoil. So he's at a disadvantage here speed-wise, and he's figuring out, like, okay, how do I deal with Shigaraki's speed? Well, I'll just use the 6 user's quirk, Smokescreen, which we see Izuku use a lot in this chapter, like really putting it on display, because I guess it's giving N, the 6th user, like his credit, because, he himself said that his Smokescreen is the least useful of all of the One For All previous users' quirks, and technically it is, but it's still like a good quirk, especially if you use it in the way that Izuku is. So it's just giving him credit and being like, you're not useless. And it's also, further building up Izuku as like, he's so altruistic. He's such a good guy. Like, he respects all of the quirks of the previous users. Like, he thinks they're all cool and he wants to all utilize them to their best extent, even the one that is considered least useful. So he's using Smokescreen to work his way around Shigaraki's speed advantage. Hey, real quick, guys, if you could also follow me on TikTok or Instagram, whichever platform you like to use more. I upload TikToks and Reels on there every day. So if you could really support me, I'm trying to get to 10,000 followers on either of the platforms. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. And he's also figuring out a way that he can forcibly transfer the second user's quirk to Shigaraki, because the way that One For All works is that, yes, you could pass it on to somebody, but you need to give them your DNA in some way. You know, we saw originally All Might gave like a piece of his hair to Izuku, and then he ate it, and then he got it. But obviously, Shigaraki's not going to eat a piece of Izuku's hair because he knows that Izuku is up to something. He knows that he's planning something right now. So the plan is that Izuku is going to pierce Shigaraki, you know, create a wound in him. And this is going to be difficult because Shigaraki has the regeneration quirk, so he can just instantly regenerate. So he's going to have to pierce him, and then at that moment, get his own blood, like Izuku's own blood, into that wound. And then that will transfer the second user's quirk to him, because One For All can be transferred forcibly. Like, the only person that needs to consent to the transfer is the user of One For All, not the recipient. So yes, I know, very gross. But, you know, we are in the final battle here, and the fate of the world is on the line. So, you know, you got to do what you got to do. And also, you know, this is like a war that has been lasting over 100 years. So, if you need to transfer some blood in an open wound, then you got to do what you got to do. So they start going at each other again, and Shigaraki is about to activate Decay on the ground to just destroy everything. Because, you know, it can spread as he touches things. But Izuku uses his black whip chain to like pull, only that piece will be decayed and it can't further spread to the other pieces of the ground, which of course is the strategy that they were using inside of UA, the anti-decay system as it was called, back when this whole final battle started, when they were trying to, you know, detain Shigaraki inside of that dome. And while Shigaraki is remembering back to that, his danger sense goes off and he's thinking that, oh, you know, Izuku's behind me, despite him being in front of me here. But no, it's actually Gran Torino's cape that Izuku launched at him from behind, going through the smoke screen on a black whip tendril. And Shigaraki gets duped by this, and he grabs Gran Torino's cape and just decays it. So Gran Torino's cape, unfortunately, is gone. It's been around for a while, but it was tattered. And I don't know, maybe Izuku will get like another costume upgrade or something, but it's definitely being used in a very suitable way here, because on the black whip itself was the second user's quirk factor, or an aspect of the second user, because Shigaraki is using two quirks in order to counterattack the cape coming at him here. He's using Search, which allows him to know people's locations and their weakness if he has seen them. And he has seen the second user because he can see Izuku's vestiges. You know, he pointed out before, I can see your ghosts. And since he could pick up on that, and the black whip tendril has the second user's quirk factor in the blood, and also has his DNA in there. I know, it's like the vestiges DNA are in Izuku's DNA now, because part of them is in the quirk factor of One For All that is inside of Izuku. Yeah, it just works that way. So all of this together allowed Izuku to dupe Shigaraki in a pretty cool play here. I really like when Horikoshi is able to utilize strategies like this using multiple quirks, not only for Izuku but also his opponents, and we wind up getting really cool sequences like this. So Shigaraki getting duped here allows Izuku to get the upper hand on him, and finally it creates an opening where Izuku can punch Shigaraki in the chest using the strategy that we talked about, where he's going to break him open, you know, create a wound, and Izuku has already been covered in his own blood, like he's been leaking, and his punch goes into Shigaraki's chest with his blood on his hand, and now he has successfully transferred the second user's quirk to Shigaraki. And as the second user, Kudo, goes into Shigaraki, he's like, you know, don't worry about it. I've always just been a ghost. My consciousness is fading away, but before I get absorbed by Shigaraki, he, like a meteor, goes in to the void crevice thing where Tenko's personality, or whatever is going on with Tenko, is being held back by like rubble and buildings and stuff. And he like breaks through it. And this like physically affects Shigaraki. He's like, oh. And after the second user does this, it somehow causes this chain reaction to where not only Shigaraki is experiencing memories from the past, but Izuku is experiencing them as well. Like, we see the moment when Shigaraki met Stain and Toga in season 2. Also, it kind of reminds me like how far Toga has come as a character, because she was like really, I mean, forgive me for saying it, but really stupid when she was first introduced. Obviously, she's not stupid now. She's one of the better characters in the series with tons of character development and progression and everything. But man, Horikoshi really did a revamp on her, a much needed revamp. But we're also seeing during the sports festival when Izuku was facing off against Shoto, when he was like forcing Shoto's character arc there, where he was like, you know, I want to be a hero too, and finally gave him a reason to use the fire quirk, which he was holding back from using, you know, for a majority of his time in the series up until that point. But not only that, we're also seeing Spinner. Spinner's there because, you know, Spinner is like Shigaraki's boy. Like, they have this subtle bromance going on, which unfortunately isn't explored too much, but it is there. It is explored, but I just wish they had more moments together of being bros, you know? We only kind of really see it in flashbacks. But Spinner, you know, originally came to the League of Villains the same way that Toga and Dabi did, because Stain inspired them. You know, as we found out, of course, later on, that there was much more to it than just Stain for Dabi. Now we're seeing, like, Shoto and Spinner there, like, their memories are, like, taking, like, some kind of form in this battle here. And the first user, Yoichi, is like, your memories are blending together? And then they're like, no, don't stop. And the sixth user's like, you know, it's working. The second did it, but it's still not enough. You have to keep going. And that's where the chapter ends. So the plan going at this point is, I assume, you know, as the narrator says, that keep the transferring the users, is that, you know, like we talked about, I think 2 chapters ago, maybe, or maybe we talked about this at the previous chapter review from 2 weeks ago, that Izuku will have to transfer all of the vestiges to Shigaraki in order to defeat him. And I thought that was a great way to have them all do their final moments here. And, you know, a cool way to get the most out of One for All in the end. And every time he transfers one of the vestiges to Shigaraki, I guess we're going to unlock more memories, like more moments from the series. And of course, it will eventually get to the point of where Nana, the 7th user who has the float quirk, needs to be transferred to Shigaraki, because she is Shigaraki's grandmother. And they never really had a heart-to-heart yet, because Tenko, before he became Shigaraki, really admired Nana. And I think this will finally unlock the memory that maybe he was suppressing, where we saw many chapters back where it was subtly hinted at that All for One was the one who gave Shigaraki the Decay quirk, because we see him, or a person that looks like him. I'm pretty sure it's him. All right, it's freaking him. I don't care. He dropped off Tenko to his mother one day. Like, he just found him outside and then brought him back to his mom. And I think it was at that point where he transferred Decay to him, because it suddenly awakened in Tenko. Because Tenko was like 5 years old. And at that point, if your quirk hadn't already manifested, then it means that you're pretty much quirkless. So the fact that it just randomly manifested and conveniently killed this whole family was a part of All for One's plan at this whole point. So I think that the transfer of the vestiges is going to unlock this, and then maybe it will have the moment where Tenko is able to break through Shigaraki at some point. But there's still a lot of fighting that has to happen before that. And I don't think it's going to be that simple. There has to be some kind of epic ending here where, I don't know, Izuku hits him with like the world of Smash or something, or the galaxy or the universe of Smash, something like that. It has to go obviously beyond United States of Smash. So we're continuing the final battle between Izuku and Shigaraki here, as Izuku is forcibly giving Shigaraki the vestiges of One for All. We saw in the previous chapter that he was successfully able to give him the second user's quirk, which was able to minorly damage the blockade within Shigaraki's consciousness or quirk factor or whatever's really going on here that is holding back the aspect of Tenko Shimura within him. Tenko Shimura being the original person that Shigaraki was as a child. So this is the whole plan here. Give him the vestiges of One for All so that they can break through within him to pull out that Tenko Shimura aspect of him. And as the second user plunged into that blockade, they started to relive memories throughout the series. And the first user, Yoichi, posits that their memories are blending together because it's an accelerated response due to One for All resonating with the All for One quirk factor, since they are brothers, Yoichi and All for One. And I guess that's just enough for their quirk factors to resonate in this way. I don't think we've seen this happen with any other siblings and their quirks, but then again, these are the two most powerful quirks to ever exist, and I'm pretty sure they're like the second and third quirks to ever exist as well, right? Because their mother, it was said that she had the very first quirk, the drill spike quirk thing. And where did she get that? I don't know if it's ever going to be explained. I think that's where Horikoshi wants to start and stop that. But it's fine. You know, there's tons of series where we don't get the full explanation on the origin of the main plot point of the series, but, you know, it is what it is. But anyway, going further, we see that Izuku is trying to just straight up give Shigaraki all of the remaining vestiges at once here. Not doing it one by one like he was before. All of them at once in one punch, trying to break through to him. You know, because his plan was to essentially make like an incision inside of Shigaraki and using Izuku's own blood on his fist to force the DNA transfer. But Shigaraki has been making that more difficult since he's been using his finger armor stuff. Also, as Izuku is about to try to land this multi-vestige transfer punch, we see a flashback to the USJ arc. And we see the USJ Nomu here, my boy. If you guys have been following the channel for a couple years, you know that I really like this character. And he's still, to this day, one of the strongest. Like, he would still be a problem if he was around today. Like, in my opinion, he's even stronger than the high-end Nomus that we, you know, saw after the fact. And it's like, why didn't Yujiko just keep making the USJ Nomu? Because he was, like, ridiculous. But I digress. Anyway, Izuku winds up hitting Shigaraki with this punch, but only one vestige is able to make it through, and it winds up being N, the sixth user with the smoke quirk. Shigaraki's will is just too powerful to the fact where he can just reject all of them being transferred at once, which is understandable because, you know, that's the whole reason that All For One groomed him, formed him in the way that he is, because All For One himself didn't have a strong enough hatred or will to be able to forcibly take One For All. So he needed to have an heir in Shigaraki to be able to do that. So it's understandable that he is strong enough to not only just forcibly take it, but to stop it forcibly being given to him. Well, not entirely, because, you know, the sixth user was still able to make it through. As Izuku says here, that means that he can't completely shut them out. And as N makes his way through into Shigaraki, he breaks through another portion of the blockade here, which causes another ramification of memories to come forth. And this is the biggest memory here that we've seen so far, because it is giving us insight into a theory that we've been speculating about for years now. Like, even way back in the pandemic, I did like a collab with Anime Uproar talking about this theory. Like, that's how long we've been discussing this. And I thought, you know, Horikoshi was just going to forget about it at this point, but no, it's because we see a memory of Tenko, you know, little Shigaraki, holding All For One's hand. And if you're wondering, like, okay, so what does this mean? Well, it means that All For One is the one who gave Shigaraki / Tenko the Decay quirk in the first place. And it goes all the way back to chapter 235. Because as Shigaraki was fighting Redestro, he was like reliving some of his memories in that instance as well. You know, especially for the audience. And we got a flashback to when Tenko was 5 years old. And the flashback itself starts off with a man in a suit and a hat dropping off Tenko. And his mom's like, "Thank you for being so understanding. I'm sorry my boy bothered you." And she's like, "I'll be sure to give him a talking to." And it's like, that's where it started and ending. Like, real subtle, hiding in plain sight. And there's only one guy that really dresses like that in the series, and it's freaking All For One. And right after this, you know, we see his dad being a piece of crap to him because, you know, he's admiring heroes and whatnot. And his dad doesn't like heroes because, you know, Nana is his mother and she had to let go of him because she's protecting him from All For One, which was all for naught because he wound up just targeting the family anyway. But after he abuses Tenko some more, we see Tenko crying. And the narration shows us that he's 5 years old at this point. And that's important because in the My Hero world, if your quirk doesn't manifest at least by the age of 5, that means that it probably never will, and that you are essentially quirkless. But it's after this fact, you know, later on, that his quirk does manifest. Actually, just a few pages later in this chapter, where he winds up accidentally killing his dog and his entire family, in one of the most tragic, if not the most tragic sequence in the entire series. So this instance we're seeing in this chapter where he's holding All For One's hand, I assume, is moments before that, where he's walking him to his house to drop him off. So yeah, this was like the whole thing in the first place. All For One and Yujiko's plan to groom their new heir to be the vessel of All For One so that they could take One For All and then All For One could take over his body, which obviously he failed to do, and it blew up in his face. Also the same way that Bakugo blew up in his faces. But after Izuku sees this, he's like, I'm getting closer. I have to keep trying as much as it takes. So yeah, once Izuku hits him with another vestige, I'm pretty sure we're going to go more into this flashback. And we're going to see, the full truth that I just talked about. And this will, allow Tenko to come more through Shigaraki. And also allow Shigaraki to see the truth of everything. Even though he's so far gone at this point, I doubt he'll even really care that much. But the whole big moment that we're really waiting for, with not just the memories being unhatched, but it's for Nana to be sent to Shigaraki. Because once Nana gets in there, the vestige of the 7th user Nana, it'll probably pull Tenko more so through, I guess, more than ever, because Tenko admired Nana, and that's why his dad abused him. I'm laughing. It's awful, but I'm just saying, it's such a stupid motivation for his dad to be such a piece of crap. But we're cutting away from the battle between Izuku and Shigaraki here, as Shigaraki is, freaking out again with his quirk singularity body, doing all of the Tetsuo stuff that we've seen before. And we're cutting away to see that UA is successfully being landed. That's been falling for, a year now. Gentle was being able to hold it up with his quirk. And we also see Cementoss helping out. Really like Cementoss. Very underrated character. I wish Horikoshi would have utilized him more in the series. His quirk to be able to manipulate cement is ridiculous. But that ticking clock of UA falling is now done. They're on the ground. So we don't really have to worry about that anymore, I suppose. But at the end of the chapter, we're cutting away to the evacuation shelter. And we're seeing everyone watching the battle, because it's being recorded by that student with the Karen haircut. And we see Eri running away. And that's the final panel of the chapter, and the narration's she's running towards... So this is another theory that we've been talking about for a while, and I'm thinking that this is going to lead to Eri eventually getting to the battlefield. I know, it's how is she going to do that? Well, one way or another, she's just going to get there, I suppose, because she kind of has to, in my opinion, because I think Eri is going to wind up using her quirk, her rewind quirk, on Shigaraki. And yes, I'm pretty sure she can use it, because it looks like her horn is big enough. It has contained enough energy or time particles or whatever the logic behind her quirk is to use her quirk. And why is she going to use it on Shigaraki? Well, she can rewind him, in theory, back to him being Tenko. Because, the whole thing here is that Shigaraki is inherently innocent. He wasn't born to be this ultimate evil villain. He was Tenko Shimura at first. He wanted to be a hero, ostensibly, since he admired Nana so much. But it was All For One that, ruined his entire life. Shigaraki, who he is now, is far beyond saving. We've already established that. But Tenko is not. There's still that aspect of Tenko in him, which Izuku is fighting for right now. So once that aspect of him breaks through, Eri can come in and use her rewind quirk to transfer him back to Tenko, because the way that I see it, at least, is that Eri's quirk is time-based more than any other magical supernatural aspect of it. I think she's rewinding the time of a person. So in theory, the aspect that Shigaraki is, the entity that he is, can be rewound back to Tenko as a child and then be re-raised again as a hero, right? I think that's where it's headed. And I also think that maybe it's not just going to stop there. Maybe Eri's quirk can be used on Toga and Dabi as well, because they're all inherently innocent. They're all victims of circumstances. Toga, she just needed counseling and therapy, especially quirk therapy as well, because the quirk that she was born with made her drawn to blood, made her be obsessed with being other people, because that's how her quirk works. And, her parents were pieces of crap as well, didn't really help her. So that led her to the life that she has lived. Same thing with Dabi. Even though Dabi, as a child, Toya, he was still crappy, but still could have had better parents, obviously. That led him down to the path that he has lived now. So if she just rewinds all three of them, they can all be re-raised as heroes, right? And then it's kind of like a cop-out, you know, saving these characters that have done terrible things, but it's Horikoshi, it's battle manga, and I can see it happening that way. I'm not too positive that this will happen to Dabi and Toga, but I can definitely for sure see it happening to Shigaraki. So I suppose we're coming to the end of a few storylines from ancillary characters throughout the series in this chapter, but of course we're still continuing the final battle between Izuku and Shigaraki, also coming to the point of a huge revelation of Shigaraki with the possible origin of his quirk coming from All for One. You know, we talked about that in the previous chapter, and I'll talk about it again in this one because at the end of the chapter, we see Izuku coming to the memory of that very moment, possibly. But that could also tie to something else that relates to Izuku. Something that might fundamentally change this series forever. Which is like another huge theory that we've been talking about for years as well. And I'll get into that towards the end because, you know, that's when that stuff happens. But before that, we see Izuku, of course, still taking on Shigaraki. And we're cutting away to Eri. Because at the end of the previous chapter, we saw that Eri was watching the final battle on TV, and then she started to run away. And that had a whole bunch of theories coming out of it, like she's going to show up at the final battle somehow, wind up using her rewind quirk on either Izuku or Shigaraki or both, and it still is a possibility. But now that we're getting a continuation of that sequence, where we see ectoplasm like stopping her from moving any more than she already can, and she's like, you know, Deku needs my help, understandably, because he really does, but ectoplasm says he's hundreds of kilometers away, and then she says, I'll ride one of those thingies. She's referring to like the underground elevators that they created to connect the schools and everything to UA. And ectoplasm says Dabi, Makia, All for One, those fights were bigger than we expected, compromising the evacuation system, and it's not going to be operating anytime soon. And it's like, all right, fine. But then even going further, he says, well, it also appears that you haven't stored enough energy for rewind because our horn isn't like long enough. She hasn't stored enough, whatever energy is required to use her quirk powers. It's still not explained. It's just classified as energy at this point. But it's pretty much ectoplasm and almost even Horikoshi here just shutting down all of these theories and expectations that we had of Eri. Like, guys, sorry, she can't do anything. She's not even going to leave this place, let alone activate rewind and save the day. And it's like, I understand that, but also, Horikoshi, why even do the whole cliffhanger at the end of the previous chapter? Just to subvert our expectations and to hype us up, just to get us slightly disappointed? I mean, I don't need Eri to save the day, but it just makes sense in the story for her to have one last moment where she ultimately resolves one of the largest parts of the final battle, right? Now, I'm not saying all hope is lost. There still is some way that she gets there. I don't know, maybe there is another elevator, or maybe there's like a teleport quirk, or I don't know, a helicopter picks her up. I don't know. It doesn't seem likely, I know, but it just seems like a waste to not use her one last time, to either restore Izuku so he goes to full power and then can beat down Shigaraki one last time or whatever, or like we talked about before, rewind Shigaraki's body back to when he was Tenko, like when he was 4 or 5 years old, because her powers, her quirks seem to be time-based. So she, in theory, could do that. But maybe not, or maybe after the final battle is over and Izuku incapacitates Shigaraki, he brings him back to wherever Eri is, and then maybe that's when she does it. The same could also go for the other League of Villain members, which we don't have any status updates on yet, like Toga and Dabi. We don't know if they're dead, although it was left off with the implications that they probably did or are going to die very soon. But, you know, all we can really do is just I don't know. Just wait to see what happens at this point. I would say it's like 50-50 if she is going to do anything to ultimately rewind something or someone. Also in this sequence, we see Kota come back because, of course, he's at where they are as well with all the rest of the civilians watching the battle. And he's like comforting Eri, saying that, big bro Midoriya also cries easily, and so do I. I'm a crybaby. And it's like, I like this callback because Kota has been a recurring character in this series and has been a part of Izuku's growth as well. So it's nice that he's there in the end too, because he probably will wind up being one of the next generation of UA hero students, along with Eri probably. I'm not saying that we're going to get like a Boruto Academia, but if we did, I wouldn't be surprised if Kota and Eri are one of the main characters, or in that main cast. Then we see like another character, like that one guy from the Dark Deku arc, or at the end of it, where he was like reluctant to letting Deku into UA because, All For One was after him, and that was the whole reason why they had to stay in that shelter there, because of All For One. And then he ultimately just gave in and was like, say you get to rest here for now, will we get back to our old lives eventually? Meaning that, yeah, but, he has to take care of the League of Villains, which he ultimately is doing right now as he is watching the broadcast. So the theme going forward into this chapter is just showing the rest of the people that Izuku has touched, in their heart. He changed them. I mean, he's changed many characters, but we're just seeing various examples of it. Then we come to Yaoyorozu and Denki, who we haven't seen in a little bit, and they're pretty much done as well, coming from UA landing successfully on the ground, and they're also witnessing the final battle. Then we're coming to what was happening after the battle with Tsuyu and Uraraka. So Uraraka gets picked up by like this medical helicopter, I think, or just a regular helicopter, because she is on the verge of death as well after the end of her fight with Toga. And I don't think this means that she's going to die. I really highly doubt that she is. I mean, she's going to survive this for sure, but there has to be some stakes here, I suppose. It's way more up in the air on if Toga is going to survive or not, more so than Uraraka. But it's kind of just showing that, like, yeah, everybody's aware of what she did. She did play a big part, not only in this arc taking down Toga, but also in the Dark Deku arc, and convincing everybody to just essentially accept Izuku as the Messiah. Then we're also cutting over to Hawks and Tokuyami, who are both done. They can't do anything else because, after the battle with All For One. Also, Gigantomachia is there as well. He's down on the ground because he got knocked out by All For One in that battle too. But they played their part, like we also talked about a couple chapters back with all of the final fight against Bakugo and All For One. How everybody played their little part in taking down All For One incrementally. So no matter how small somebody did something, it all added up in the end to get to the point of All For One being defeated by Bakugo. And these are some of the players here. More so Hawks. I feel like he kind of did dirty, to be honest. Like, All For One took his quirk and then did nothing with it and then just died. It's like it didn't even have to happen. But I guess Horikoshi just felt that he needed to take that quirk from Hawks. He needed to kill Hawks without killing him, And then coming back to the whole recurring narrative of Izuku opening people's hearts, we see Rocklock with Lady Nagant, after she assisted Izuku, and he asks her, like, why are you helping Midoriya? And she says, well, yeah, he opened up my heart. And Rocklock's like, yeah, he does the thing that evildoers hate the most. And he's pretty much trying to do the same thing to Shigaraki here. So this could be, I don't know, some subtle foreshadowing, or just straight up telling us that he is going to touch Shigaraki's heart. Like, he's going to open his heart up the Izuku way. Because coming into the end of the chapter here, we see Shigaraki like freaking out. I mean, he's already been freaking out in this battle, doing the whole quirk singularity finger body thing. And he's like, stay away, like reaching out, trying to stop Izuku coming close to him. And Izuku's just like, I don't care. And he's about to throw this massive punch at him. But Shigaraki is also like reliving the memories at this time as well. Because we've seen that as Izuku has been giving vestiges to Shigaraki, they both have been been reliving memories at the same time. It's some kind of glitch or phenomenon between the One for All and All for One quirk factors interacting. And what Shigaraki is seeing is the moment before he killed his father, because we see his father's like, Tenko, stop. This is like when his quirk awakened. And as Izuku is about to punch him, suddenly Izuku is seeing the memory of Shigaraki's childhood home. And he remembers what Shigaraki told him in the previous war about how the destruction of everything stemmed from that house. Which is true. It all started there when Tenko suddenly manifested the Decay quirk and accidentally killed his entire family. So Izuku in the next chapter, I suppose, is going to witness this, because before this, no one was really aware of Shigaraki's origin. Only like All for One and Yujiko, and then, Tenko and Shigaraki were aware of what had happened. So once Izuku sees this, I suppose it'll give him a better way to open up Shigaraki's heart, I suppose. And like we also talked about in the previous chapter, this will probably be the point where it's revealed that All for One was the one who gave Tenko the Decay quirk. And I suppose that will also allow Izuku to find a way to show to Shigaraki that he is inherently innocent and that he was just a victim of circumstance, essentially, because, All for One was targeting Tenko because he was the grandson of Nana, who was holding One for All at that time. Now, the big other theory here that could maybe tie everything together, and I don't want to say this is like guaranteed or concrete. It's just something that we've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 years at this point. I think about 5. And it's that the Decay quirk may have come from Izuku. And you're thinking like, what? Wait, how? That doesn't make sense. And it's like, well, maybe it does. So remember, I said that Tenko manifested the Decay quirk when he was 5 years old. Now, the age difference between Izuku and Shigaraki is 5 years, right? I'm pretty sure at this point in time, Izuku is about 16 and Shigaraki is about 21, something like that, give or take a few months. So, if we also go back to the very first chapter / first episode, we see Yujiko there. And, we didn't know that was Yujiko at first until it was eventually revealed that, oh my god, he's All for One's right-hand man. And it was like Yujiko was the one who revealed to Izuku that he didn't have a quirk, right? So was that ultimately just a fun little Easter egg that Horikoshi put in there like, oh hey, what a coincidence? Or was Izuku a part of this quirk grabbing scheme from children in the hospital, where if he would find a kid that has the potential to have like a great quirk or something, that he would give it to All for One? Now, I know that quirks usually manifest around the age of 4 or something, but I'm pretty sure Yujiko could probably figure out through DNA testing or something, or quirk factor testing or something like along those lines, if you're going to have a quirk as a child or not. I mean, come on. Don't forget, freaking Glowing Baby was like one of the first quirk users. His name is Baby. So that would be an incredible twist if it was actually Izuku was born with Decay, but it was taken from him, given to Shigaraki, only for them ultimately to both come together via receiving One for All and All for One. But yeah, that's pretty much it for that one. Again, I'm saying it's not concrete. I'm not like banking on it and saying that this is going to happen, but there is a chance. And I think it would be pretty wild if it's revealed at the end of the series. So we're continuing the final fight between Izuku and Shigaraki here, and in the previous chapter we saw Izuku going after Shigaraki with the intent of finishing the fight by transferring all of the remaining One for All vestiges into him in a way to like break through his subconscious and bring out his child personality, the Tenko Shimura aspect of him, to I guess absolve like the Shigaraki consciousness. And your guess is as good as mine as to how he's going to win, or I don't know, undo Shigaraki after that point. He actually even brings it up in this chapter, which we'll talk about. But as Izuku was going to land that final blow on him, he suddenly saw Shigaraki's childhood home in front of him, because as they have been fighting and as Izuku has been transferring these vestiges to Shigaraki, this phenomenon has been happening between the two quirks, One for All and All for One, where they're like reliving and re-seeing the memories of each other throughout the series. And coming into this chapter, Izuku has successfully landed that punch on Shigaraki, transferring almost all of the remaining vestiges into him and like breaking through that inner barrier that we've been seeing that's like holding back the Tenko aspect of him. And I say almost all of the Vestiges because it turns out that Nana Shimura, the grandmother of Shigaraki, wasn't able to break through. And it's apparently because she has like her own personal hangups with Shigaraki. Because the last time that the All for One and One for All quirk factors like interacted and Shigaraki was able to see Nana, he said that, rest assured, Grandma, I also hate you. And it's not because he hates me. Referring to his father, of course, who is the son of Nana. So meanwhile, we cut over to Izuku, who after this collision and the transfer of the other Vestiges is now just standing in front of Shigaraki's childhood home. We're actually seeing his mom's name like on the doorbell, Maggie Shimura, which we didn't know before. And as he rings the doorbell, like this cool looking like shadowy apparition version of Izuku appears in front of him, and he's like, what will change after knowing about the past? And it turns out that this is like Shigaraki's defense mechanism appearing as what he sees as Izuku, I suppose. And Izuku's like, I don't know, but I don't want things to end without knowing, which is like Izuku's whole thing about how he's going about trying to get through to Shigaraki. Like, he could have probably killed him, in my opinion, despite the series saying that he couldn't have, but I'm pretty sure he could have like popped Shigaraki's head at any point if he really wanted to. But we know that that's not how our boy Izuku goes down. He's not a murderer. He will try to break through to you and touch your heart in order to defeat you. Also, in this flashback, alternate reality, or whatever Izuku is in right now, this phenomenon, it turns out that he can interact with it, like alter the memories or something, because a truck that's just randomly coming by hits him and like nicks his backpack. So I've talked about this before, but this is like full-blown quirk singularity stuff. Not like the end of the world aspect of the theory, but just that quirks become so powerful that they no longer make sense. And they're just too powerful that they start just manipulating reality on a level that just cannot be understood. Like two quirks interacting like this, they're able to interact with each other's memories on like a tangible scale and like alter the way that they play out somewhat too. Not that it's like changing history or anything, but just what they're experiencing is changing. And now that Nana is the only vestige left with Izuku, they're like talking about what's going on and like, yeah, we're at Shigaraki's core, his origin. This is the most delicate and weak spot, of course, because this is where Tenko is, or this is where Shigaraki was born, essentially, when the Decay quirk took hold of him and he accidentally killed his family. And I guess we're like at the day that this is happening, because it hasn't happened. But now Izuku is like trying to go into the house once again because his shadowy apparition self has dissipated. And now Stain is confronting him. This is, of course, like another memory that Shigaraki has because, way back in season 2 when Stain came into the picture, he originally was interacting with like the League of Villains. And he saw Shigaraki as like a fraud and like he knocked him to the ground and put like his 2 knives besides his head. And he's doing the same thing to Izuku here. But Stain like quickly dissipates and turns into Redestro. And Redestro's like, what burdens do you bear? What do you seek to build? Like the same thing that he told to Shigaraki in the end of the My Villain Academia arc. And then Redestro like transforms into Overhaul. And Overhaul's like, got a plan. Like this is what he told to Shigaraki as well. So it's a pretty cool callback to seeing like some of the major villains throughout the series and their iconic lines with Shigaraki and how they correlate to what Izuku is doing now. Because everything they said to Shigaraki, like those lines, especially with Stain, which I forgot to mention, he says, that's why you're about to die. Maybe not so much with Izuku here, but that's more so what Shigaraki wants to do. But Redestro and Overhaul's quotes here to Izuku have like this nice parallel to the two characters. Because, it originally correlated to Shigaraki's path to becoming like the absolute evil, like the head of all villains in the world and everything. And now this correlates to Izuku's plan to defeat Shigaraki. And ultimately Izuku's like, no, I don't have a plan, so get out of my way. And that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. Like, there is no real concrete plan at this point as to how Izuku can break through to Shigaraki and touch his heart, because he's beyond saving. And I mean like Shigaraki himself, like what he has become. Like, I don't really think he can go back at this point. And that's kind of what the narrative and Horikoshi has been telling us. That's why Izuku is so hell-bent on getting through to Tenko, because Tenko is who Shigaraki originally was. Like, he was innocent. He actually liked heroes. He wanted to become one like his grandmother, which unfortunately led to him becoming what he is now. And speaking of that, as Izuku opens the door, he sees like this old picture of Nana with Kotaro, Shigaraki's father, as a child. And we're also seeing other memories of Shigaraki's sister saying like, hey, let's be a brother-sister hero team, but keep it a secret from dad. And then once Kotaro, his father, sees that he's been idolizing the picture of Nana and wants to kind of be a hero as well, he, abuses Tenko. That's like the whole thing about this piece of crap character, is that he abuses Tenko, and he always kind of has. Well, as long as we have known about this going on. And Kotaro has like this major hang-up because Nana abandoned him. And yes, technically she did abandon him, but she kind of had to, because All For One was always going after her, always going after the loved ones of the users of One For All in an attempt to get to One For All ultimately. And in an ironic twist, it was all for naught, because he still ultimately wound up targeting Nana's family in the end anyway with her grandson. And that's how he got through to getting One For All, or at least closest to getting it in the end. But, as we've also talked about, it was his own undoing, because it was the same thing that had this whole big stupid plan that has like 1,000 steps in it blow up in his face, just the way that Bakugo did. But the characters here, Nana and Izuku, are seeing this for the first time, because I'm pretty sure no one knew about the abuse that Shigaraki underwent besides like All For One and Yujiko. So now Nana's seeing this for the first time. She breaks down, finally seeing like what was left after she had died, like what Kotaro, her son, had grown up to be, like an abusive piece of crap who's like really upset over something that's not really that big of a deal. And yeah, I get it, getting abandoned by your mother, terrible. But I don't know why Nana just didn't tell him like, hey, there's like this Antichrist supervillain that's like targeting us, and I'm trying to keep you safe, so I can't like be your mom. I'm sorry, and I'm the only one who can like stand against him. And I'm not powerful enough right now because One For All hasn't been cultivated enough. She was training All Might. Like, he hadn't become God yet. He only became God after Nana had died. Like, after he had died, that was kind of like the catalyst for him to go to America and start training and cultivating One For All and like grinding it out and becoming all powerful. So despite him being a kid, I'm pretty sure she could have explained that to him. But regardless, there's no excuse for Kotaro to grow up to be the absolute piece of garbage that he is. Like, I hate this character. You're supposed to hate him. He's easily the worst character in the series. But just seeing him again just like makes me like just really see how despicable he is. And I wonder if this is like going into any personal things with Horikoshi to make a character like this and have him so integral to the story. But as Kotaro goes to hit Tenko again, Izuku comes in and he's trying to like stop him, but there's like this barrier stopping him. And Izuku pressing onto the barrier makes his palm light up. Now, I don't know if this is signifying that he is breaking through the barrier, or it's signifying that there's some kind of All For One thing going on with him, because the glowing center in the hand, or the hole in the hand, has always been like All For One's thing. Like, that comes with his quirk. It's also analogous to Christ as well, but more so in this series, All For One. And I've talked about before how I think Izuku will wind up getting the All For One quirk and mixing it with One For All, and I don't know, becoming all powerful that way, or something like that. I don't know, but maybe I'm looking too much into this sequence. But like I said, Izuku does eventually break through this barrier and stops Tenko from getting hit, but also Nana comes through the barrier as well and grabs Kotaro, preventing him from striking Tenko in the first place, saying like, I'm sorry for not coming back to you, which, is too little too late, because she's not really saying this to Kotaro. She's kind of just saying it to the abstraction of the memory that they're experiencing right now. But still, Kotaro is like reacting to it, and after she does this, he like dissipates, and we see Tenko like, I don't know, morphing into another memory at this point after Izuku tries to console him. But it takes them to the follow-up of the birth of Decay. Like, once Tenko finally gets Decay and like he accidentally kills the dog, and then the rest of the family comes outside and he accidentally kills them. Izuku's about to witness all of this, and the narration is like the origin of Decay. And like I said, this is where it started, but I think in the next chapter we're finally going to see the moments where All For One sneakily gave Tenko the All For One quirk, which of course led to this big compound effect that, you know, gave birth to Shigaraki. So All For One has returned. That's right. He shows up at the end of this chapter and confronts both Izuku and Shigaraki. I know, we thought that he was completely taken out by Bakugo, but no, there is still an aspect of him remaining, and he's here now, and we'll get more into that towards the end of the video, because coming off of the previous chapter, we saw that Izuku was able to send the remaining vestiges of One For All into Shigaraki, with the last one being Nana. Like, they all broke through his Tenko debris core thing. So I think this technically means that Izuku is now quirkless, possibly, but I'll talk more about that at the end as well. So as they have been going through their memory battle thing that they've been having, where they're reliving each other's memories, more so Shigaraki's as of recent, but they've come to the point of where they're seeing Shigaraki as a child when he was like 5 years old, when he was still Tenko, and the moment that his Decay quirk has activated and he accidentally kills his family, well, accidentally kills his dog at first. And Izuku is witnessing this, and he realizes like, oh, this is the first time that his Decay quirk is activated. And we see it just like before in the original flashback. His sister witnesses what he had just done, and as she's coming out, Izuku realizes what's about to happen with her too, and before he can go to grab his sister, Izuku grabs onto Tenko's hand, stopping him. Because we've seen that Izuku can interact with these memories and like alter them somewhat. I don't think he's altering time or anything like that. Just simply altering the memories like as they play out in Shigaraki's mind, I guess. So I don't think he's making any tangible effects on reality. Unless he is, I don't know, it hasn't really been explained yet, but I'm pretty sure he's just interacting with like straight up memories at this point. So his sister isn't killed in this sequence, and Izuku is like holding his arms back and he's taking the Decay. Also, he is like a child in this sequence as well. And he's saying like, you know, we're in a world of memories, which I think further cements that like they're not altering like time or anything. They're kind of just in their own quirk factor, quirk singularity world thing that's going on right now. And he's just trying to diffuse the situation, like trying to calm Tenko, but also give him comfort, essentially, because that's really what he needed more than anything in this moment, which he didn't have. I mean, this is the moment where he breaks and becomes Shigaraki. And Shigaraki is even like breaking down in this moment. Like, he's speaking in real time through Tenko. He's like, I destroyed my house and my family of my own volition. Otherwise, why would I even have these hands? Like, putting the blame on himself despite him being a victim here. Like, he thinks that he was born with Decay, and at this point it seems like he wasn't. It seems like he probably was forcibly and unknowingly given Decay by All For One. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once we come to another flashback later on. But Izuku remembers back to Nana saying that this is the most delicate and weak spot, referring to, you know, this moment in time when Decay awakens in him. And it's a balance of like a strong hatred and sense of catharsis with sorrow and perplexity. And Izuku is like continuing to try to handle this situation the best that he can, because he doesn't want to take out Shigaraki, as we've known at this point. And he remembers back to when he was having that discussion with the Vestiges before the final battle started, when he's like, maybe there is no other way besides killing, and I don't know what I'm gonna do when the time comes. Because the Vestiges were telling him like, hey, you know, Shigaraki probably can't be changed, and he probably can't be reasoned with. Like, the only way of stopping him will be you're gonna have to kill him. And Izuku said that in response to it. And at this point, as he's holding on to Tenko's Decay, he's like, you know, I felt at ease when someone held my hand. And he remembers back to the Dark DEKU arc, like towards the end of it, when Ida was holding his hand, like when he was at his wit's end. And he's like, yeah, that's why I'm here. You essentially need the same thing. And after this, he kind of has like a breakthrough with Tenko. And Tenko remembers back to a better moment where he was like playing on the playground with his two friends, Tomo and Mikun, who he had referenced before, but we had never seen them. Now we're seeing them in the moment, like when they were playing on the playground, and one of them was like, hey, you should be All Might, talking to Tenko, and that made Tenko happy. So it was like at one point, Tenko did admire All Might. I mean, he even admired, obviously, his grandmother, Nana. So at that point, pre-Decay stuff, he was on board with heroes, which is showing like he wasn't always, obviously, against them. But then after he smiles at the notion of getting to play as All Might, he's like, no, I'm a villain, I'm evil, and destroy things. Even if all my hatred went away and I turned into an empty shell, I'd still need to become a hero to those guys, the villains. And I really like this moment because it shows what Shigaraki's true feelings are, something he's never revealed. And it's that in the end, he still kind of is somewhat of a hero, and he hasn't really let go of that, you could say, primordial emotion that he had about it. But, given his life circumstances and everything with the Decay and All for One and all of that stuff, it transformed into him being a villain, but still ultimately wanting to be like a symbol to others like him. And obviously that's like the connecting factor between the initial League of Villains here, because we see Toga, Twice, Spinner, Dabi, and Mr. Compress. Now, Mr. Compress, we don't have too much backstory on him. Twice, not necessarily the same, since he wasn't like a childhood victim the way that they were, but Toga, Spinner, and Dabi for sure are all similar to Shigaraki in that their afflictions started when they were children, and they were born with quirks or abilities or situations and circumstances that led them on the path that they are. They're all essentially victims of those circumstances. The All Might to those individuals. Because, it's easy for All Might to just be the symbol of peace, and like everybody or the majority of people can look up to him and be like, oh, he's the big superhero god that's going to save us and save the day. But it's like, what about the others? And that's essentially what Shigaraki represents. And that's why they all are ultimately on board with him, despite most of them coming on board because of Stain. Stain was like the first anti-All Might, I guess you could say, that they were able to look up to. But as we cut away from this, we see that progress is being made like in real time, in reality, because the big finger of monstrosity thing that Shigaraki was becoming is like starting to dissipate, and people are watching it on TV. They're like, the fingers are vanishing, what happened in there? And then suddenly we cut away from Shigaraki's flashbacks altogether, and we see his father, and he's talking to like somebody, and he's like, oh, you're that guy from Koga Constructions. And the guy that's talking, let's just cut to the chase. He's talking to All for One here, despite us not seeing him in this sequence, but it's definitely him. And he's like, oh, you're suffering from lower back pain? Let me introduce you to a great doctor. And I'm pretty sure he's referring to Yujiko here. And he's like, no, it's not a big deal. And then we cut to another flashback of them like having dinner or something. It looks like he's actually in that bar, I think, from season 1, like where the League of Villains hideout was. I think this might be that place. And they're just chit-chatting, and we see All for One asks him about Tenko, and he's like, what about his quirk? And his dad says it hasn't manifested yet, which we knew because in the initial flashback, it said that Tenko was like 5 years old, and it was said that like if your quirk hadn't manifested by that point, you probably were quirkless. So like I've been saying multiple times already, I think this proves that Tenko and Izuku have a parallel of both being born quirkless, essentially. And All for One getting this information here, I think was enough for him to be like, okay, well, I'm going to then give Tenko the Decay quirk so that he can accidentally murder his family and then become my symbol of hatred so that I can transfer to his body so that All for One can be strong enough to take One for All. That's it in a nutshell. And then after this, suddenly back in the memory Vestige world thing that Izuku and Shigaraki are in, All for One like comes out of the ground as like a giant head, but he's like in his like season 1 through 3 form, like when he was still in Potato Face, and he like eats Shigaraki. Like I don't think he's killing him here, but he just engulfs him with his mouth. And he's like, you foolish vessel. This nobody of a boy made you have a change of heart? You want to become stronger without ever getting rid of your weakness? What a fool. To this day, you've never made a single decision on your own. So it's like, this is All for One. It's not like a memory of him or something. Like he's interacting with this sequence in real time. And it's like, how is this happening? So, like I said at the beginning, we saw Bakugo like straight up kill, ostensibly All for One, right? He straight up killed him, I guess. He like made him revert back to nothingness. So we thought, oh, that was just the end of All for One, but no, he's still here. And I guess it's because of the prime All for One quirk factor that Shigaraki has. All for One that was fighting Bakugo had like a duplicate of All for One. So I guess he was able to still have like a remnant of himself in the original quirk factor. And I guess that's what's happening here. Because he's definitely cognizant of what is happening. So he's like himself. Because he could see Izuku interacting with Shigaraki and trying to have like a breakthrough to him. You know, as he says, change of heart. And then the narrator even says like, All for One rises. What are Shigaraki and Deku going to do? So this makes me think like, oh, they're going to have to team up to take him down. And it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about Izuku is technically quirkless at this point. Like, he transferred seemingly all of One for All to Shigaraki to break through that core. Now, I don't know what exactly is going on with that. It hasn't been explained. It just seems like he's lost his quirk since all the vestiges are gone, and I think Yoichi, you know, the first holder of One for All, when he goes, I think that means that, like, One for All itself is completely gone. Now, granted, when All Might passed One for All on to Izuku, you know, back in the day, he still did have, quote-unquote, embers of it left. Like, he could still, you know, activate the power, be powerful and stuff. So maybe Izuku can do that as well, possibly. It's even possible they might not even fight in the tangible real world. They might just fight in this memory world too. And I don't know, maybe Izuku has power here still, because he's still like in his child form when this sequence is happening, and he doesn't even have arms. So maybe he can like re-manipulate himself and become as strong as he needs to, possibly. But it seems like Izuku and Shigaraki are going to team up to take down All for One at this point, at least just from this narration at the end. And another thing that I would like to see is all the vestiges fight All for One as well, because, you know, they need to have their final say in this battle, aside from just breaking through that core. And then, you know, of course, it also needs to be revealed that All for One gave Tenko the Decay quirk, and then it would probably be fitting that Shigaraki / Tenko be the one who finally finishes off All for One altogether. And then after that, I don't know if we're still going to have like a final battle between Shigaraki and Izuku. I think defeating All for One here, like once and for all, might be what decides the final battle, possibly. So Izuku has lost both of his arms, and he's seemingly quirkless as well, which means that he is straight up powerless at this point. And it raises the question of like, has Izuku like lost in this final battle? And are the other heroes going to have to pick up the slack for him? Because they're showing up at the end of this chapter, which is pretty exciting, and we'll talk about it. But there's a few other things that we need to talk about too. Like, first of all for One is back, by the way, and he's like back. I mean, we thought that he was killed by Bakugo, but no, he has resurfaced from the consciousness of Shigaraki, at least at the end of the previous chapter. And coming into this chapter, he is like able to completely dissolve Shigaraki's consciousness and take over his body as well, which was like his grand ultimate plan this whole time. You know, raise up Shigaraki as a hatred vessel, having hatred strong enough so that he would be able to forcibly take One for All and like bypass this failsafe that it has on it. Because All for One just inherently didn't have enough hatred or a strong enough will for some reason, that he needed to raise Shigaraki in order to do it for him. And then eventually take over his body, which also needed to be modified to house the insane power that All for One would eventually have, like the All for One quirk itself. Because as the All for One quirk got stronger from getting more quirks and mixing them and developing new ones and such, his physical body would, in theory, eventually be unable to contain that power. So Dr. Yujiko, like All for One's right-hand man, ran those experiments and augmented Shigaraki's body so that the full power of All for One would eventually be able to be contained within it. So like I said, it's all come to fruition at this point, except with a price. And we'll get into that. But All for One also says that he was even able to come through the consciousness at this point because of what Izuku has been doing in these last couple chapters in his final battle against Shigaraki, trying to break through to him mentally, get through the subconscious, figure out his history, and then bring the original personality that he had as Tenko Shimura, as a child, bring that to the surface. And then, I don't know, he would figure out some way to resolve the issue from there. Not even Izuku really knows how to fully flesh out that plan, but he was at least starting with the breakthrough. So him breaking through Shigaraki's consciousness, along with the other vestiges of One for All, like one by one, they all broke through that mental barrier. In the process, also like giving their lives to do this, or the abstraction of their lives, or whatever their souls are within the quirk factor of One for All, when Izuku forcibly passed them on to Shigaraki in order to get through that barrier. So they're all gone now, at least for now. They might show up later, possibly. But this is also why Izuku is now quirkless, because he had to give One for All to Shigaraki forcibly. But it wound up, unfortunately, being what All for One needed for him to come through. And how is he coming through? Because, like we said, we thought he was killed by Bakugo. Still not sure. I guess there was still like an aspect of his consciousness or his soul in the original All for One quirk factor, the way that the original One for All vestiges are in the One for All quirk factor. I mean, I guess that's just the way that it worked. And he could just have simultaneous consciousnesses, like in his tangible body that had the copy of All for One, the one that everybody was fighting, that Bakugo ultimately wound up finishing off. And now that he's coming through, it seems like Shigaraki's consciousness might be fully destroyed, but I don't think that's the case. There is still an aspect of him left, and we'll get into that as well. But speaking of Shigaraki and All for One, we're seeing the instance where he received Decay. So, first of all for One apparently convinced Shigaraki's father to have Shigaraki in the first place, because we know that Shigaraki had like a sister, or should we say Tenko had a sister, and I guess his parents were content with just having the sister, but then All for One like convinced them to have Tenko because, I don't know, some kind of All for One math here where he said that Tenko's sister was like too old and that she wouldn't be able to be used for his plan for some reason. I mean, he could have just cleared it up by saying that, yeah, I don't want it to be a girl, I want it to be a boy. Because it seems like that's probably the case with it, but no, apparently she was too big and he couldn't handle her or whatever. I don't know. But after Tenko was born, for some reason, All for One was like able to come in contact with him as a baby. I mean, I guess All for One was like friends with Shigaraki's dad or something. I mean, they have like drinks together in these flashbacks. It's not fully explained like why they're friends or how they're friends. I guess like All for One just forced his friendship on his father. And again, in case you're unaware, he is targeting Tenko, Shigaraki, and his father because his father is the son of Nana, Nana, the seventh user of One for All, who he was feuding with at one point, eventually became the teacher of All Might. She's the one who actually passed on One for All to All Might. But yeah, he like took Shigaraki's original quirk that he had as a child from him. Now, what is that quirk? We don't know. We probably will never know, but I guess that quells the whole theory about him being born quirkless like Izuku. But it also confirms the theory that we've had for many years now, and it's that he did, a few years later when he was 5, give him the Decay quirk, like right before he dropped him off at his house. And then later that day, the big unfortunate sequence where Decay manifested, then he accidentally killed his family, and it led to him becoming Shigaraki. Now, here's the even crazier part to all of that. It's where they got the Decay quirk from. Because back in the Villain Academia arc, when Shigaraki's backstory is first revealed and how Decay came to be, Yujiko tells him that it is a variant quirk and it's never been seen before. And that's because it was made by Yujiko because they got it from Overhaul's quirk. Well, a couple chapters back, when we got the backstory on Dabi about how after he accidentally exploded himself trying to push his quirk to the limit, and he was, so conveniently and coincidentally picked up by All for One and then put into that orphanage that he had set up, the orphanage where he kind of had the prototypes to Tenko and Shigaraki, because remember, he needed to build up a vessel from a very young age, with hatred and whatnot, so that they can develop like a genuine, pure sense of hatred and a will more powerful than All for One, so that they could take One for All. But he had multiple candidates in there. One of them, Dabi, which eventually just became Dabi, kind of just, didn't really care about him that much. But another one was freaking Overhaul. Yeah, Overhaul was in that orphanage. And apparently, Yujiko took Overhaul's quirk, or should I say, Yujiko copied Overhaul's quirk. And then he did some kind of quirkery on it to augment it so that it became Decay. Now let me explain Overhaul's quirk. Because Overhaul, as we know, has one of the best quirks in the series ever. Even to this day, it's one of the best quirks. And its name is Overhaul, but it makes me think that maybe its original name wasn't Overhaul, and maybe it was like Disintegration, because that's what it's being referred to as here. Although this is just one translation, maybe future translations will be different. But he can break down things or rebuild them, and vice versa. So what they did was they took like the breakdown aspect of Overhaul's quirk, like as they say, the Disintegration, which eventually just became Decay, and they removed the reconstruction ability from it. But I guess they did some other stuff too, because obviously Overhaul's quirk doesn't spread the way that Tomura's Decay does, and it's not as like volatile as Tomura's quirk. Now also we've seen that Tomura had to go through like many levels to get Decay to the level that it is now, because like at the beginning of the series it was pretty good, but it wasn't as absolutely insane the way that it is now, like spreading and like destroying miles at a time. So there was something more that went into that quirk, and it's possibly even, I don't know, something to do with Tomura inherently maybe, but pretty interesting how this is all coming full circle, and how it was kind of laid out, I guess, in the beginning, as soon as we saw Overhaul's quirk, that there was some kind of similarities between them, because they both need to make contact with their hands in order to activate their quirks. Because Shigaraki initially needed 5 fingers to activate his quirk, as to where Overhaul just needed 1 finger. And of course, the interaction between Shigaraki and Overhaul, where Shigaraki eventually winds up taking Overhaul's arms. And this brings me back to my original question with Overhaul and All for One, when we originally found out that Overhaul was in the orphanage. And aside from that, even when All for One was like in Tartarus with Overhaul. And the big question is like, why didn't he just take Overhaul's quirk? Like we were talking about, it's one of the best quirks ever, and it really would benefit All for One to have it. Especially when he was all mangled from the All Might fight, and he became Potato Face. Overhaul's quirk could have fixed that. So I think this is like just a plot hole. Or just, maybe Horikoshi wasn't thinking about it, or Horikoshi just thought it would be too broken to take Overhaul's quirk and give it to All for One, because now it's not just All for One that should have taken it, but it was Yujiko, or Dr. Garaki, who literally made a copy of it, but then augmented it. So it's just take Overhaul's quirk, because I don't know, it's too late now, but the fact that it's being brought up here makes me think that it might come back into play later on or something maybe. But speaking of that, the reason why I think that the most is because once they come out of this memory world battle thing and they come back to reality, after All for One like seemingly disintegrates Shigaraki's consciousness, he comes back and he's like in Shigaraki's body now, and it seems like he's in full control until he kind of hears something, which could be a fragment of Shigaraki's consciousness, or it could be Tenko. And he's like, silence, and then he grows like a new hand on his mouth. So this is either his final form or his penultimate final form. So that goes back to what I was saying about, like, I don't think Shigaraki's done here. I mean, I just think it would be a little anticlimactic if this is just how Shigaraki ends, and then it's just everyone versus All for One, and then Shigaraki was just kind of taken out. It just wouldn't be that easy. It at least has to be Tenko. Like, Tenko is the one who initially was supposed to be saved by Izuku, because, he was just a victim of circumstance. So I think that is going to come back into play here. Like, he's not done. But the other person that comes out of this is Izuku. And like we said, both of his arms are missing because they were like decayed in the memory world, which I guess had tangible effects on the actual reality. And on top of that, like we said, he also gave his quirk forcibly to Shigaraki to break through to his subconscious. So he's done at this point. Like, no arms, quirkless. What can he do? Now, All for One, the way that he speaks about the Vestiges in this chapter, namely Yoichi, the first user of One for All, his brother, he says that he's no longer here. So I guess they're dead, which means that not even All for One, like in the body of Shigaraki, has One for All in him. Like, the Vestiges are done. The quirk of One for All might be gone, like completely. which makes me think, like, what does Izuku have? Because when All Might gave Izuku One for All, he still had quote-unquote embers of it in him. Like, I don't know, a fragment or a residual residue or something of the quirk factor of One for All. That's how he was able to be powerful still and fight and all that stuff before he eventually used it all up in the United States of Smash to defeat All for One for the second time. So does Izuku have that? I don't know. It's not explained yet. But other than that, it's like, how can Izuku come back from this? Well, I mean, it could come back with, like I said, Overhaul's quirk being used in some way. I mean, Izuku's flesh on his arms is gone. It would be different if he just lost them and Overhaul was there, then he could reconstruct it. Now, using Overhaul's quirk, I mean, Overhaul is still like a bad guy. He's still full-blown heel. I don't think he's going to have a sudden change of heart and like try to help the good guys for some reason. But if his quirk, just in general, was used, he could augment Izuku with the flesh of other people. Like, he could take All for One's body or whatever, or arms or flesh, and then reconstruct Izuku with that. So if that doesn't come back into play, then if Shigaraki takes over the All for One consciousness, or Tenko does, then maybe Tenko can have some kind of quirk awakening to Decay. If Decay didn't already have an awakening, you know, with the spreading and the intense, like, mild blowing ability of it, if that wasn't the awakening, and he does have like a true awakening to Decay, then he can add the reconstruction aspect of it, which was originally taken away when Yujiko synthesized the quirk. Then he can reconstruct Izuku that way. He can also reconstruct himself into, I guess, being like young Tenko again. And that would go back to solving the problem that we were talking about for a while now, that I originally thought that Eri was going to be the one that had to fix. Because Eri, in theory, could still fix everything here. She could just rewind Izuku back to a point of where his arms were still intact. She could even, in theory, at least in my opinion, rewind him to the point of where he still has the One for All quirk factor. I know there's a lot of hardcores that disagree with me on that, but she did it to freaking Mirio, so why couldn't she do it to Izuku? And also bring back his arms. And she could do the same thing for Shigaraki, rewind him back to when he was Tenko. But, I don't know, it seems like Horikoshi kind of quelled the notion of Eri being included in this final battle a couple chapters back when Ectoplasm was like, no, there's no way. We're too far away and you would just get in trouble and you don't have enough energy in your horn. It's like he was kind of just telling the audience to shut up about the Eri theories, which is like, well, you put it out there, bro. Like, why are you telling us to shut up? I'm not against it. I would be on board with Eri just randomly showing up and Deus Exing the day. But either way, it could be Eri or it could be Tenko regaining the consciousness, getting the Decay quirk if it is not gone, because it's also said by All for One that Decay quirk is gone as well. So the only thing that really remains here is the All for One quirk, I guess. I'm not really sure. But aside from that, at the end of the chapter, as All for One is about to just take out Izuku, suddenly Sero shows up and grabs him with his tape, which is amazing. I'm so on board with this. I'm a big fan of Class 1A. It's just a shame that they haven't really had Spotlight in a very long time, because it kind of became like the Izuku show. Well, I shouldn't say that so much, but it kind of became like the main overall characters show, I should say. Like the top 5 main characters, more or less. But I like that Class 1A is coming back into the fray here, because they are cool in their own ways and they are useful here. As we see here with Sero stopping All for One, and it's not only him, it's also Sato and Ojiro, 2 other characters we haven't seen in a while, also coming into the fray here, barraging All for One. So hopefully we get to see more Class 1A come in here. Like maybe all of them come in and then have their own little just beat down on All for One. They all just jump them and they just beat them down. But not only them, but it's also Aizawa coming in the final page here, coming through a Kurogiri warp gate. So I think the last time that we saw Aizawa was when he was like fighting against Kurogiri, trying to break through to him to bring Shirakumo through, because that's who Kurogiri originally was. Shirakumo, you know, Aizawa's best friend that he had when he was a student in UA, and he was eventually made into Kurogiri by Dr. Yujiko. So I think this means that he broke through to him. And I don't know if Shirakumo is like completely back, but he might have taken over the Kurogiri consciousness possibly. So now he's like a half and half being, but he's still a good guy. So he's going to come back and hopefully help everybody out, and then we'll have like a big Avengers moment where he just starts opening portals for all of the remaining heroes to come through, and then like I said, they all jump All for One. But also now that Aizawa is here, he could use his, you know, eraser quirk to shut down the All for One quirk, leaving him not, you know, fully defenseless, but the fact that he wouldn't be able to use the All for One quirk and would just have to rely on his body, would put him at a big disadvantage. I mean, I'm pretty sure he could still do the big, Tetsuo quirk singularity amorphous body thing. Although that remains to be seen. It could have been damaged in the mental battle that he was having with Izuku prior to this. But it's even possible that Aizawa shutting down the all-for-one quirk factor might shut down like all-for-one himself, since he's seemingly living in that quirk factor the way that the Vestiges were living in One for All. So as we saw in the previous chapter, Izuku has lost his arms, as well as seemingly being defeated by All for One and just waiting to be killed until now, because he's actually getting his arms back and he's getting reinforcements from the rest of Class 1A and Aizawa, because they're all coming to save the day at the end here. And how Izuku gets his arms back is pretty interesting, because it's one of the things that we were speculating about, and it's actually from Eri. Eri is regrowing Izuku's arms that he lost in the battle against All for One in like the memory vestige world thing that he was in, along with Shigaraki / Tenko. Now, Eri's not exactly showing up there in person, but it's actually her horn from her head that is being used without her being there, and it could just regrow his arms, because that's how her rewind quirk works. It kind of reverses time, I suppose. It's never outright fully explicitly stated that that is the case, I guess, but that's pretty much what it is. Now, we'll also go into the logistics of that, because we also have to go over the beginning of this chapter, which is kind of crucial to all that stuff. So we saw at the end of the previous chapter, Aizawa had showed up coming out of a Kurogiri warp gate right to where Izuku was to help him against All for One, along with Sero, Sato, and Jiro. And we're finding out how he was able to do that, because the last time I think we saw Aizawa along with Present Mike was when they were kind of like pseudo battling Kurogiri. And it turns out that they had fallen off of UA and gone through Kurogiri's like activated warp gate and went to just some random island, I guess, or something. And there they were able to have their final breakthrough with him, because Kurogiri originally is Shirakumo, who was like the third member of like their friend group between Aizawa and Present Mike when they were students in the second year of UA. And back in the day, Shirakumo was killed on a mission. We don't see this actually in the series, but it does happen in the spin-off My Hero Academia Vigilantes. I think it was chapter 63. Where Shirakumo was like on a work-study mission with Aizawa, and while they were in the city, there was like this villain Garvey, and he attacked. I think it was like a elementary school or something like that, preschool, something like that. And as Shirakumo was like trying to protect the kids with his cloud quirk, he was like hit by the falling debris, and it essentially killed him. However, before his body was able to be recovered by like the heroes or the police or the firefighters or whatever, of course it was Dr. Yujiko who was able to find him. And with his body, Yujiko was able to make him into a Nomu that we know now as Kurogiri. Like altered his cloud quirk into becoming Kurogiri's warp gate quirk, and he also altered like his personality so that he would become like the caretaker of Shigaraki, I suppose. But as we saw, way back when Kurogiri was captured and brought to Tartarus and was interrogated by Aizawa and Present Mike, there still is like an aspect of Shirakumo in him, in there somewhere. And they're able to bring that forth again here in this chapter, but not fully bring Shirakumo through. Like, the way that they talk about Shirakumo in this chapter, it doesn't seem like he'll ever be able to go back to being just fully Shirakumo again. The best they could do is kind of bring him to like this half state of consciousness between him and Kurogiri, but they're able to do that long enough to get full control over Kurogiri's quirk, so now they can just start teleporting all over the place and start bringing people to the battle, in order to help Izuku and finally end this war. Also, let me put it out there that this is yet another problem that Eri can easily fix, in my opinion. If she was able to gather up enough time energy in her horn for her rewind quirk to activate long enough, she could, in theory, rewind Kurogiri back to being being Shirakumo. And I really don't care if you guys disagree with me on that. I know Eri's rewind capabilities are very decisive, but given from what we've seen, pretty sure she could do that. And we're also going to talk more about Eri's quirk and the possibilities of it, and the fact that Horikoshi doesn't want to abuse it because I guess he just thinks it would be too easy and maybe would ruin the story. In my opinion, I don't think it would, but you know, we'll get into that a little more. But anyway, like I said, now that they have slight control and temporary control over Kurogiri's warp gate, now they're able to go to where Tsukuuchi is, in one of the shelters, and they start asking for whoever can help them, because apparently Monoma is unable to fight anymore because he has like a concussion or something. Because earlier on in this arc, we saw that Monoma was using Aizawa to be like a conduit for his erasure quirk, but I guess they're not going to be able to do that anymore. I'm sure Monoma will come back in at some point at the end here, but we see that one of the people that Aizawa is able to recruit here at like this shelter is a character by the name of Astro. Now, don't worry, we've never seen Astro before in this series, but if you're like a hardcore Horikoshi fan or just hardcore into Shonen Jump, then you probably know who Astro is, because he was from a series that Horikoshi previously made and was actually published in Jump back in 2012. The series is called Sensei no Bulge, or I think it's also known as Barrage. But yeah, this guy Astro was the main character of that series, and unfortunately it only ran a couple months in Jump, which of course meant that it was canceled, which is actually pretty impressive for Horikoshi, because he went from, in a span of like months, having this series canceled and then making My Hero later on in 2013, and of course it went on to be one of the biggest Jump series of all time. So it shows you guys, don't give up on your dreams, or don't even just give up on trying to achieve something. It doesn't even have to be your dreams. I don't want to be too sappy with that stuff, but yeah, just keep going. It's okay to fail. You're going to learn a lot from it. You're probably going to learn more from your failure than your victories, to be honest. But anyway, I don't think this is literally Astro. It's just some guy that looks like him. It's kind of like an Easter egg, because Astro lives in like a very different world than the My Hero world. But anyway, just wanted to point out that fun little Easter egg. We're also seeing that there's like another fight that has been going on, but this is happening in a flashback, because Tsukuuchi tells Aizawa that back at Takoba, Sero Sato and a bunch of other heroes are still fighting one of these villains by the name of Ghastly, which we've only seen like once or twice, I think, so far in this war. He's the guy that kind of looks like the Babadook, I suppose. And we're not seeing the conclusion of this fight, but we do see that Tokage Kaminari and Ectoplasm come in to help with that battle. But we know that they at least won here or something, because like we were talking about, Sero Sato and Jiro were at this battle, and at the end of the previous chapter they come to help Izuku. So they left this fight because I guess either the others took over to defeat Ghastly or he was defeated. It ultimately doesn't really matter. This is kind of just a placeholder that I think Horikoshi put here. But anyway, Aizawa eventually comes to where Izuku is, you know, picking up from the end of the previous chapter, and he asks him, like, you know, how long has it been since you lost your arms? And he doesn't really know because, you know, it happened in the mental world, and it seems like time clearly wasn't passing the way that it does in real time. But he says that he can also feel that Shigaraki was rebelling inside of All for One, but not anymore, and that's because we saw that when All for One took over the Shigaraki vessel, he kind of ate Shigaraki's consciousness, and it seems like he was killed at that point, but he definitely wasn't, because he also felt that there was like this faint voice in his head, and that's why he put the hand over his mouth to kind of shut it up. And either that was Shigaraki or it was Tenko. It was probably the latter, to be honest, because, you know, this has to end with Tenko coming back. Shigaraki's kind of a lost cause, and it was always showed that there was an aspect of Tenko still there. But then we're coming to Eri, because we're seeing a flashback of her giving her horn to Aizawa. You know, like we said, this is how Izuku's going to grow his arms back. And apparently she broke off her horn with the help of ectoplasm, because I guess she was inspired by Aizawa cutting off his leg in the previous war when Shigaraki threw the quirk destroying bullet at him, you know, so that it wouldn't spread to his quirk factor. But she gives the horn to Aizawa because she knows that she can't go to the battlefield, and that she was also waiting to use this on All Might and Bakugo. And here's where I'm going to go into my little mini rant about all this stuff. First of all, I have been campaigning for Eri to use her quirk on All Might since Eri was introduced, essentially. And I honestly think it was a waste that she didn't, because if she rewound All Might to a state of where he could, deliver a United States of Smash, at least bring him to like the beginning of season 3 mode, he would have been so monumentally helpful for the rest of this series. But then again, I guess it just would have been too easy, right? I mean, that's why All Might got shelved, because he was too powerful. I'm not going to give you any spoilers on other series, but that's happened in another really big shonen lately. There was a character that was just too powerful, and they kind of had to bench him, because I guess the story would have just been too easy. But then again, like at this point, you could just keep upping the power creep, because only Izuku and Shigaraki and All For One are leaps above everyone else. So it ultimately comes down to just Goku having to save the day. So if you could just have more people out there that are around that level of power, I think it makes things more interesting. And especially All Might's my favorite character, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I think everyone will be down with All Might rewinding to become powerful again. But then again, we did get him having the armored All Might suit, so like I said when we were reviewing that, it's better than nothing. Now, Eri, her quirk is just too busted. She could just fix all problems. And, like I also said, maybe Horikoshi feels like that would ruin the series. But then again, he is the one who introduced it. And it's just unfortunate because I see this a lot with these mangakas, especially in like Jump series. It's that they're not ambitious enough. I wish that they did more ambitious things and kind of just threw caution to the side and just did fantastical things and make it more exciting. I'm not saying break your story, but I think taking big swings that end in big positive notes are better than ones that end in negative. For example, like just randomly killing like a big character. Instead of just killing off a big character or diluting the story into something that doesn't really interest people anymore, just do something fantastical and just buff somebody, bring somebody back from the dead. Like that's why I really, really enjoyed the final arc of Naruto. Like once the Edo Tensei stuff started coming in, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I wish more series did this. But I digress. Eri ultimately says that she wants to sing like Jiro because, that was like her big moment in the series, the end of season 4. After all the overhaul stuff wrapped up, she saw the big concert. And she kind of wants to recreate that, essentially. That's like her dream. And then she wants Deku to see it along with everybody else when the war is over. So I guess that's kind of a hint as to what the final chapter will be, maybe, or one of the final chapters after this is all wrapped up. But Aizawa was like, hey, this is what Eri wants. You can't die until you hear her sing. So then he gives Izuku the piece of Eri's horn, and his arms that he had lost start to grow back. But it says that it should take like 2 to 3 minutes for him to heal. So that's like a little timer there, which is nice because we also see other portals opening with essentially the rest of Class 1A coming through. We don't literally see all of them. We see Mineta, Kaminari, Shoji, Momo, Koda, and some others too. But it would just be fitting to have it come full circle here and all Class 1A students come through to fight All For One, in their last moment in this series or their last moments of battle in the series. And I guess Aizawa is going to help them, being the class teacher, with Erasure to shut down All For One's quirks. He's still powerful, of course, but at least he can't use all of his busted abilities. And then while they're fighting him, that will be enough time for Izuku to regain his arms. Now, I don't know how far back he's being rewound here. I don't know if Eri's horn is bringing him back to having a quirk factor again so that he has one for all, or he has embers of it. It's still not fully explained. We still don't really know what's going on with this stuff yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets rewound enough to have at least the base one for all. Like, he's probably not going to have the other Vestiges quirk factors in him, which I think is fine. If he just is like All Might, I think that would be pretty cool, unless Horikoshi just plans to end the series with him ultimately being quirkless, which I guess would also be bookending the series. He starts the series quirkless and ends the series quirkless, but still as a hero somehow? I don't know. I mean, obviously he couldn't be like a full-blown hero without one for all. I mean, I guess he could have support gear, but that would kind of be lame, to be honest. But I'm not really sure, but let me know what you think is going to happen with Izuku. Is he going to be rewound enough to have the quirk, or is he just going to be quirkless and, I don't know, somehow be strong enough to land like like a finishing blow, or he doesn't, and he just talks Tenko through All for One and saves him that way, possibly. Or he's just support gear guy. Let me know. Coming to the final sequence, at least in the battle between Izuku and All for One here, because at the end of the chapter, we see Izuku running after All for One, wearing an All Might shirt, which I guess is symbolic for everything coming full circle here. And for what Izuku is able to do is still unsure, because he says that he only has embers left. Embers, similar to what All Might had at the end of the Camino arc when he was taking on All for One back in season 3. And we'll get into the possibilities of what that could mean and what it could lead to for Izuku ultimately. But coming off of the end of the previous chapter, we saw that Eri was able to give Aizawa her horn. She broke it off her head. And I guess you can kind of use it like the bow and arrow in JoJo's, where if you pierce somebody with it, they get the ability. Because Aizawa pierces Deku with her horn, and it rewinds Izuku back to heal his arms, because we saw coming out of his dream sequence Vestige world memory thing with All for One and Shigaraki, he had lost his arms to Decay, and that happened in the real world as well. But now, being pierced with Eri's horn, he got the rewind quirk to take him back a couple minutes. Now the couple minutes was only able to rewind his arms, so now his arms are back, but he still maintained all of the damage that he received, and he doesn't have the one for all quirk factor. So he is essentially almost quirkless at this point, aside from having the quote unquote embers left. And of course that also means that he no longer has the vestiges. I think the vestiges are completely gone at this point, since we saw them sacrificing themselves, forcibly going into Shigaraki's All for One quirk factor in order to break through to his consciousness. So they're gone. But coming into this chapter, before All for One was able to completely take out Izuku, who was defenseless essentially at this point, we have a full-blown Avengers Assembled moment. I know that we had this at the beginning of this arc, almost 2 years ago at this point, where the portals had opened after we saw that Monoma was siphoning Kurogiri's quirk. But now it's kind of I guess Kurogiri / Shirakumo willingly doing the portals. We still don't know what's fully going on with Kurogiri / Shirakumo at this point, because it just cut to Aizawa coming through the portal. But they were able to I don't know, break through to him in some way, Aizawa and Present Mike, but we didn't get to fully see Kurogiri Shirakumo, I don't know, communicating. Maybe it'll come back, but like I said, the full-blown Avengers Assembled moment here, except instead of saying Avengers Assembled, it's we are here. Everyone's saying All Might's iconic phrase, and we are here is just pretty much all of Class 1A with a bunch of other heroes as well, some 1B, some pro heroes, and this is awesome because it's much needed. I said this before in my spoilers review, but it's a shame that a lot of these characters, if not most of them, kind of got neglected in the latter portion of this series, because it kind of just delved into Izuku with the vestiges getting stronger, and it just became, All for One versus One for All, instead of My Hero Academia, the series that we fell in love with. So with that, a lot of characters kind of got neglected along with their development and any kind of future prospects that we had for them. But not everyone, of course. We did have the main characters who had storylines set up for the very beginning, such as Toga, Shoto, Uraraka, for example. And also Shoji had his big moment with Spinner, but everyone else, didn't really get too much, except being a part of a much bigger battle than just something, singular for them. And students alone, or 20 students alone in Class 1A. So you can only really give them so much, but it's cool that they're at least coming together here in the end. Everyone joining together to take on All for One, which is essentially what was bound to happen anyway. But as for All for One, we saw that he was able to come back by taking over Shigaraki's consciousness. He actually mentions that here. He says that he himself should have been destroyed too, since he was a part of Shigaraki. However, when he heard the sound of Yoichi's vestige shattering, his world lost its colors and he gave up his ambitions, and then nothing that Izuku could do could overcome that pain. Which is interesting because All for One killed his brother like 100 years ago anyway. So I don't know why he would care now. I guess because he always thought that he was still alive through One for All, but now that his Vestiges had died, you know, like we said, giving himself to break through the quirk factor in Shigaraki to get through that consciousness to Tenko. Now that he is like absolutely gone, like there's nothing left of Yoichi or the other Vestiges. I mean, we might see them towards the end of the series. Maybe there's like one last gleam of them, possibly, because, you know, like we thought All for One was dead when Bakugo took him out, but no, he was still there lingering in the quirk factor of All for One. I guess that's how he came through to take over Shigaraki. Now, as for where Shigaraki is, I doubt he's dead. I mean, we did see that his consciousness was ostensibly killed, but obviously that can't be the case because Tenko still needs to survive. Like, that is the end goal. We've been talking about it for months, maybe even years at this point, that Tenko still needs to come through and somehow take over Shigaraki's vessel to some extent. We found out that Decay, like Shigaraki's quirk, was derived from Overhaul's quirk. They kind of just took away the reconstruction aspect of it, and I said there was a possibility that Shigaraki's quirk could have like another awakening on top of the awakening that it already had, and he can like regain the reconstruction quirk and then reconstruct his body to being Tenko again. I know that there's a lot that goes into that, but there has to be some way that Tenko comes back other than just some crazy quirkery Deus Ex that just forms him back. I mean, now that Eri is out of the equation, because we thought that Eri was probably going to be involved in that, since unless you like stab her with Trigger or something, you know, the quirk boosting drug that we haven't seen in a very long time, which would be pretty useful for a bunch of characters now, but I guess it's just too powerful. And that's also why Horikoshi doesn't want to keep abusing Eri's quirk, because it just solves too many problems, like I've been saying throughout the years, even more recently. I just wish she was used more fantastically. Like, just, you know, take a few swings, have some fun with the series. It doesn't have to be so grounded in the ending here. If you are, in fact, ending the series, which it is, we're only have a couple chapters left at the point, depending on how long Horikoshi wants to ride out the post-war chapters, which, you know, if we're going off of like other battle mangas in Shonen Jump, they only give you like, you know, 2 or 3 chapters really after the big final battle is over. I mean, I would love it, of course, if we got another full arc of just post-war with whatever happens with the academia and everybody becoming pro-heroes and everything, kind of what we saw in Endeavor's vision of the future earlier on in this arc when he was going against All for One. But, you know, who's to say what's going to happen? I just don't think we're going to get too much post-war stuff, unfortunately. But anyway, coming back to the chapter, another portal is opening, and now it's Shoto and Endeavor coming through. Yes, they're joining the battle as well. We haven't seen them since they were able to defeat Dabi, mainly Shoto. We're also getting an update on the rest of their family, you know, Rei, Fuyumi, and Natsuo, and they're pretty much done, or at least Rei is, because she was getting her final moment along with the rest of the family, using like their ice quirks to be able to protect everyone from getting melted by Dabi's like final big explosion thing that he was doing. And as for Dabi, no updates on him. Don't know if he's alive or dead. I think the last time we saw him was like around chapter 391, somewhere around there. I think it was like 390 when he had like his big defeat, and he was not remorseful at all. So yeah, it doesn't seem like he might have a happy ending unless we come back to him. Same thing with Toga, or maybe all of the original villains, you know, Spinner, Shigaraki, Toga, Dabi, all of the ones who are kind of connected via being victims of circumstance as children. Maybe they all have their one final moment or something in a Vestige world or something like that. I don't know if they're all going to be able to survive, but it seems like Tenko at least will. Then we're getting essentially close to like the ending assault on All for One here, where everyone, all of the heroes that are here are pushing on him all at the same time, and he winds up doing like you know, his classic quirk mixture thing where he just uses multiple quirks and creates like appendages from them. He's done this a few times. He did it against All Might and Kamino, did it against Bakugo, and of course it didn't work out. Like, this usually doesn't work out for him, so I don't know why he keeps doing it, but I'll give him that it looks really cool this time. He looks like he's created wings. It was mentioned by the translator for the spoilers that he looks like the Gun Devil from Chainsaw Man, and he kind of does resemble that to an extent, but we could see like those spikes coming out of it. The spikes, of course, representing the first quirk that he was able to take, which was from his own mother. She had like some kind of spike quirk, which was, oddly enough, the very first quirk to ever exist. Don't expect any more info on that. That's all we know. It was All for One and Yoichi's mother who had the first quirk, and it was like a spike quirk. I don't know why she gave birth to All for One, which is the strongest quirk to ever exist, but okay, whatever. Anyway, everyone's pushing against All for One here in his big gun devil arm form thing, and he's fighting back. And we also see 13 there using her quirk, which is like a black hole suction quirk, really powerful. It's too bad that she wasn't utilized more in the series. I guess she's a little too overpowered because she could just kill anyone with that quirk if they're not strong enough to resist the vacuum of it. But anyway, we come to Izuku trying to get up. You know, like we said, he was rewound, but not enough for him to recover the damage that he had taken. And Aoyama is helping him back to the battle, you know, taking his hand. That's, you know, really symbolic in this series. The whole needing a helping hand, both literally and figuratively. Like, it really helped Izuku come out of his dark Deku arc once Ida put out his hand for Izuku to take, and we're seeing that happen again with Aoyama, who needed Izuku when he had his big reveal about being the Force traitor. Now it's coming back again to where Aoyama is helping Izuku, as he was previously helped before. And Aizawa is there too, and he gives Izuku an All Might shirt. This was the shirt that was worn by like that guy also in the Dark Deku arc that was kind of like going against Izuku being there because he didn't trust him. He thought that he was like the cause of all of their problems because he was All for One's target and everything. But of course he came around to him once he found out the truth about everything and saw the light. And he gave Aizawa that special All Might shirt, as where Izuku's putting it on now. And it looks kind of funny because, like, you know, usually in these final sequences of these series, the characters are supposed to look cool, like they have their final gear, their final suit or whatever, or they're just battle worn, which Izuku is, but he's just wearing like a t-shirt. It's kind of funny, but it's cool at the same time because, like I said, it's coming full circle. Izuku started off the series as a quirkless, you know, powerless, All Might fanboy, and he's essentially ending it the same way, because that brings us into what is he going to do here, because he's quirkless. He doesn't have One for All. He only has the embers meaning, I guess, you know, just small fragments of the power of One for All, just like how All Might had it back in Kamino, and he was able to deliver that United States of Smash with the remaining of his power to defeat All for One. Now, does that mean that's what Izuku is going to do here? Not really sure, because Izuku did use the United States of Smash before, but it was like in the third movie against the villain. I forget his name, the blue guy, Fleckturn, I think his name was. And it wasn't like the same type of United States of Smash that All Might used, where it's just like one big punch that created like a tornado. It was like a multitude of punches, actually. So I don't think it's just going to be that simple. Maybe he's going to create his own move. I said before, it could be like the World of Smash, or, you know, something like that. I don't know. Something Grand Smash. And if it's not that, then we could see a One for All quirk awakening. And you're wondering, like, wait, is that possible? Because technically, was the awakening of One for All when he gained the Vestiges? And it's like, I don't know. It's possible that that just was what inevitably was going to happen with the quirk, you know, due to the quirk singularity. Because the way that One for All works, with it being passed on from person to person, it kind of bypasses the whole generational aspect of it. You know, instead of having to give birth to a child and then grow up, you know, and it going on for hundreds of years, it was able to just happen by bypassing it onto person, and the quirk evolved that way, taking a part of each user's quirk factor and adding it to the original quirk factor of One for All, and it eventually became as powerful as it is now. So I don't know if that's a quirk awakening or just inevitability, but if there is some kind of quirk awakening here, and it just somehow regenerates the quirk factor of One for All in Izuku, and then he's able to, I don't know, just be like All Might essentially without any drawbacks, that could happen. But if it doesn't, then this means that this is Izuku's final move, and that after this he will be quirkless. And it's interesting because it goes back to what I was saying about Endeavor's vision of the future, with all of the, you know, class 1A main students grown up to essentially be like pro heroes at that point. Izuku is there, and he has like a new cape and everything. So is he just like a quirkless hero? I don't know. I mean, I could see Horikoshi ending the series with him being quirkless, you know, like I said, coming full circle. So we're coming to the final sequence of the final battle of this series here, because we're essentially seeing Izuku's final attack against All for One. And there's some other things happening here, such as all of the heroes helping Izuku achieve this, but also the American heroes coming to the final battle here. That's right, the president of the United States, not Joe Biden, but in the My Hero world, it's somebody else, sending the American heroes here. And that's pretty significant, and we'll get into what that could be about, because it might change the series forever, despite it being the end. But as we saw in the previous chapter, All For One was kind of going in like his final mode here, trying to take out Izuku once and for all, while Izuku is trying to do the same thing against All For One, where he gets his last costume upgrade in the form of an All Might t-shirt as he rushes down All For One, trying to hit him with his final attack while being assisted by all of the remaining heroes that are available, especially the main ones from Class 1A that we saw come through Shirakumo's portals that was assisted by Aizawa. Now, Aizawa is also asking Shirakumo/Kurogiri to use more of his portals here, but apparently he's exhausted. And we could see him like talking to Kurogiri, but he still looks like Kurogiri, but I guess he's referring to him as Shirakumo here. Shirakumo, of course, being the person that Kurogiri originally was. One of Aizawa's best friends back in the day, along with Present Mike when they were second-year students in UA. So I guess that means that the portals are done, meaning that we're probably not going to see the heroes from America come through the portals, question mark, but we'll get into that. But as Izuku is trying to make his way to All For One here, All For One once again decides to combine all of his quirk factors into one and make one big ultimate attack, which we've seen him do a few times throughout the series, which each time he's done this, he's lost as a result of it. But he says it's different this time because he's in his emo phase. You know, since coming back from the depths of defeat and being killed, whatever lingering consciousness that was residing in the quirk factor of All For One that Shigaraki had, he like came back and was able to suppress Shigaraki's consciousness / kill him, question mark. It's still up in the air. We'll get into it because I think it's coming back a little later on. But he says now that he has no emotion since coming back from that, especially now that his brother Yoichi, the vestige of him, died, you know, in the effort of being forcefully transferred to Shigaraki to break through the quirk factor / Tenko consciousness wall. I know I'm going through a lot here, but just try to keep up with me. All of that has caused All For One to just be emotionless here because apparently before he was too full of emotion and he didn't have enough hatred. That's why he had to create Shigaraki in the first place, to be able to take him over so that he could take One For All forcibly. But anyway, because of that, you know, being emotionless, he could just, I don't know, use his ultimate quirk combination better. And what he does here is he makes like this big ultra fantastical cannon thing. And it's pretty cool looking, I'm not gonna lie, and he fires this thing off. And you're gonna be pretty surprised about how this is stifled because Hagakure, aka Invisible Girl, deflects it. Yeah, I know, pretty wild here. Now, I'm not saying that this, in theory, shouldn't be able to happen, because Hagakure's ability, like, reflects light, or bends light, essentially, right? I mean, that's how she's able to become invisible. We've seen her do this with Aoyama's abilities. However, this is very different. This is, All For One's, like, ultimate attack. This is, like, a super high, powerful, end-of-series beam cannon from the main villain, being deflected by a character that really shouldn't be able to do this, to be honest, but it is what Horikoshi wanted, and this is Hagakure's, I guess, final moment, her final big purpose in the series, to deflect this grand ultimate beam cannon. I mean, she's kind of just deflecting it with her hands, but still, I know I said this before, but this is straight up like atomic bomb versus coughing baby territory. But alas, this is what Horikoshi wanted, so it is what it is. But right after this, we get a pretty incredible sequence where Momo Yaoyorozu creates a freaking railgun with her quirk. Yeah, I know, pretty wild stuff here, and it's being powered by Kaminari, who has like the electricity quirk. And they're able to fire off their own beam at him with his own beam that Hagakure redirected back at him. This is a pretty great sequence, and I just wish we could have seen more synergy like this between the students. I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I just feel like the latter part of this series is just focused too much on Izuku and the battle between One for All and All for One. It is My Hero Academia after all, and it did start off as this cool, you know, superhero high school battle shonen world building thing, but then it kind of just diverged into Izuku is the Messiah. But it is what it is, at least we're getting it now. But, however, this big railgun joint attack thing here doesn't really do too much against All for One as he just thwarts it away. But the heroes still keep pressing through here with Sato and Ojiro helping Izuku along to get to All for One, because that is the plan here. To have Izuku get a big opening so that he can hit All for One with one last attack, because that's all Izuku essentially has left here. He just has the embers of One for All, because like we said before, you know, he forcibly transferred all of the vestiges of One for All into Shigaraki in an attempt to break through to get that Tenko consciousness to come out of him. And by doing that, he sent like the quirk factor of One for All itself into him essentially, so he doesn't have it anymore. And just like All Might did against All for One back in Season 3 before he delivered the final United States of Smash, he just had embers left. And that's all Izuku has here. So he's going to hit him with something. And they're trying to set up that opening so that he can do it. He's also getting assisted by Tsuyu and Shoji and Ashido and Kirishima. So yeah, all of the students here getting their last moments in helping Izuku deliver this one last attack. It is a pretty cool sequence. Everyone's doing their little part here. As we saw, that was like the theme before, with them all working together to ultimately take down All for One the first time. You know, when Bakugo eventually wound up taking him out completely, but he still came back again, like we said. But now they're still working all together here. Even Mineta is here helping in this final sequence. And it ultimately comes down to Ida, who is holding Izuku's hand again, assisting him to get to All for One. You know, Ida obviously was one of Izuku's first, like, main friends in the series, but we also saw that he was pivotal in helping Izuku come out of his emo phase in the Dark Deku arc, you know, grabbing his hand. Hands in general have just been a huge theme to Horikoshi, not only in the series, but also in his own life, because he had like difficulty drawing hands. It was like one of his weaknesses as an artist, and he trained really hard in order to get good at drawing hands, and he ultimately became like one of the best hand artists in Shonen Jump, I guess. So I guess it's kind of analogous to Izuku's own journey in a way. But as Izuku is continuing to make his way to All for One, the hole in his hand starts to bleed. He's always had a hole in his hand because I guess it comes with the All for One quirk. Like, he has to touch you and then take your quirk that way, and I guess it just comes through it. We also talked about how it's analogous to Christ, of course. There's always been like a Jesus allegory to All for One in some way. We've seen throughout the series with Horikoshi, but, you know, especially the bleeding here goes into that mythology as well. But the bleeding is also meaning that something is happening to All for One here, and I think it's probably the Shigaraki / Tenko consciousness trying to make its way through again, because we saw before that when All for One was able to take over Shigaraki a couple chapters back, he said something like he heard a voice, or he was like, "You're still there," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, and then he put the hand over his mouth to kind of stifle that, you know, further suppressing whatever was going on inside of his head. Either it was little Tenko coming through again, or it was Shigaraki. Most likely Tenko, because that still needs to happen. Like, Tenko still needs to be saved here. Whatever the aspect of Tenko that still exists. We saw that it's being represented as him, like, literally still being alive, as like some fragment of his consciousness or something being held back by hands, and that Izuku saw that, and that is who he wanted to save in Shigaraki. So yeah, one way or another, Tenko has to come back. I don't know, there's going to be some kind of Deus Exi quirkiness happening where his body gets morphed back, or I honestly don't know what Horikoshi is going to do. I thought it maybe had something to do with Eri, but now that we saw that Eri's quirk is pretty much being used up, like her trump card has been used up because she broke off her horn, gave it to Aizawa, and then Aizawa like stabbed Izuku with it, and then rewound him back to heal his hands. So that, is off the table. So I don't know what else is going to be used here to have Tenko come back to reality. But let me know in the comments what do you think is going to happen with that. Or it's just not, and then All For One dies along with the vessel, and then, I don't know, Tenko has some kind of like spiritual sequence, quirk world thing, conversation with Izuku where they like, I don't know, he's at peace with himself and then they go to quirk heaven or something. But anyway, also during this whole sequence, we've seen that everybody has been watching this throughout the world because the final battle is being broadcasted. And we're seeing various characters reacting to this. Such as Ochako, we're seeing what's going on with her. She's still alive, which is great because, we're hoping that she doesn't die. Coming off of her battle with Toga where she lost a lot of blood. And she does see Izuku doing his final sequence here. We're also seeing Melissa from the first My Hero movie, my favorite battle manga movie. Melissa, the daughter of David Shield, who was like All Might's best bro / possible lover when he went to America after All For One had killed Nana. And he was able to help All Might, with gear and stuff like that and just support. But also, Melissa is like super good at creating gear and stuff. Like, possibly even better than Hatsume. She actually developed the red gauntlet for Izuku, or at least it's heavily implied that she did within the series. In the movie, she totally did, but I'm talking about the manga continuity. But it's great that she's finally being shown here. I wish that she was integrated more into the series, but it's nice that she's being canonized here fully. Another character being fully canonized here is Roddy. Roddy is the character from the third My Hero movie. He was kind of like Izuku's almost boyfriend in that movie. They had an interesting relationship, but he was, like the side piece in that movie. And he's reacting to this as well, so he's fully canonized as well, which means that somehow the events of all of the movies actually did happen in this series one way or another. But another person who is reacting to all of this is the President of the United States. Now, I don't know exactly when this sequence is happening. I don't know if it's happening in real time or if it just already happened, but apparently he is saying that he is sending all of the American heroes to Japan to help Izuku here. Now, I'm not really sure what the logistics of this are because, first of all, this is like essentially the ending sequence here, right? Like, this is the end. Because at the end of this chapter, we see Izuku getting through and landing his punch on Shigaraki here. And we don't really know what happens after that. We just see him landing the punch. Nothing really grand is happening. It's just a standard punch happening. So if this is the ending sequence here, and this punch does defeat Shigaraki, then the president sending the heroes to Japan is kind of useless. I mean, I guess they can help in rescuing and the recovery of everything, because there has been a lot of damage and everything. But, like, assisting against the villains, it's kind of a little late for that. And I guess it's also redemption for the president because he was kind of, like, on All For One's side. Not, like, evilly, but he was just betting on All For One to win. I guess he was being pragmatic about it. He was like, yeah, we kind of just have to accept that All For One's going to win. Maybe that was, like, Horikoshi's, like, commentary saying that the United States is like evil in a way and that they'll side with whoever is realistically going to win despite the morality of it, which, I mean, as an American is pretty much true. I'm not going to get too much into politics here, but yeah, the president was kind of like on Shigaraki / All For One's good side in a way. I guess trying not to get on their bad side, but now I guess this is rectifying that and he's sending all of the heroes here. So what does this mean? Who are the American heroes? Because, Star and Stripe is dead. And she was like the #1 American hero. Well, I think this is Horikoshi's way of finally tying in My Hero Vigilantes into the series because the main character of that series, Koichi, who eventually becomes Skycrawler, is an American hero. Even though he's Japanese, he is stationed in New York because he is the sidekick of, like, the other former #1 hero. I don't know if he was ever officially designated as #1 American hero, but he pretty much was. And that is Captain Celebrity, aka Christopher Skyline. And if most of you guys don't know what I'm talking about here, that's fine. I don't expect you guys to read My Hero Vigilantes. To be honest, I didn't fully read it. I skimmed a lot of it, so I'll kind of give you the cliff notes. Koichi basically has this quirk called originally Slide and Glide, but then it gets reclassified as Flight, which is interesting because that's also what Captain Celebrity's quirk is called. And long story short, he can basically project an attractive / repulsive force from his hands and feet. But he can like push this ability to the limit. Like as the series goes on, he's able to use it to where it eventually like covers his entire body, and he can like fire beams and stuff, and he can do jumps in midair, kind of like how the airwalk works in One Piece, if you're familiar with that, from like Sanji and the CP0 agents. He just has a lot of versatility with this quirk, and it's one of the best quirks ever, in my opinion, for sure. I'm really not doing it justice, but you should check out some of the highlights of Vigilantes and Koichi if you want to get more into this. If he does show up in the next chapter, I'll do more research on this. I'm just more familiar with Captain Celebrity, who also could be coming over, since they're kind of like a package team here, because, like I said, Koichi, who is now known as Skycrawler, is the sidekick of Captain Celebrity at the end of My Hero Vigilantes. And Captain Celebrity's quirk is busted. It's definitely top 5 best ever. It's also called Flight, and he can like cover himself in this barrier thing, and it basically allows him to like fly, and he can also make things levitate as well, and it gives him like superhuman strength, and he has like a barrier from physical harm. Yeah, I know, that's ridiculous. It's essentially like the superhero quirk in a way. So like if Captain Celebrity and Koichi come over, that's like such a powerful duo. To be honest, they should have been in Japan the whole time, but it just would have kind of like ruined the series in a way, because then the stakes would have been lowered, because they're just as powerful, if not even more powerful, than the top 5 heroes in Japan. Outside of Izuku, of course. So they kind of had to stay over in America, despite, the quirk devil and all of the powerful villains being in Japan. But I guess we'll just chalk it up to the American president being a coward or whatever. So this is it. This is the ending of the final battle of My Hero Academia. Because in this chapter, Izuku finally defeats not only just All for One, but also Shigaraki. And that's it. I don't know how many more chapters we have left in the series, but my guess, probably got 2 or 3 at this point, I'm assuming. But this is it. If there's any more villains after this, I would be pretty surprised, but it seems like it is over, at least for the fighting portion of this series. But, of course, we'll get into how all that happened. Because coming off of the previous chapter, we saw that all of the heroes that were left were essentially helping Izuku to get one last punch on All for One / Shigaraki, which he successfully does with the final embers of One for All. And once he hits All for One with this, All for One is pretty much done. Like, he realizes that his regeneration isn't healing his body, and he wasn't even able to use Danger Sense to pick up on Izuku about to hit him, because all of the other heroes helping him in that instance were like throwing it off. And apparently it's due to his body being exhausted and his mental state being destroyed as well, because, we saw that once All for One came through Shigaraki and took over the body once again, he was like in this big emo state because Yoichi, his brother, had finally died. Like the vestige of him died, being forcefully given to Shigaraki / All for One to break through that Tenko barrier. And his body is beginning to crumble here. And it actually goes back to All Might saying that if One for All was given to like a person with a weak body, they would explode essentially. And Izuku saying like, hey, All for One, this is the power that was cultivated by 9 users over like the course of around 100 years, maybe a little more than that. We don't get an exact timeline, but it's something like that. And I guess this is just a cool way of saying like, hey, everyone did their part. Even though, like, it really started with the 4th user when he started abusing the power stockpiler aspect of the quirk and started beefing it up. And then, of course, it was All Might who really made it into the god-level power that it became. But everyone worked together to eventually get it to the point of where it's with Izuku passing on the final embers to All for One here, finally breaking through to him. And it's essentially One for All that is killing him, not just Izuku, exclusively. And as All for One is dying yet again, different from when he died against Bakugo, he's more like, I haven't achieved anything yet. I'm the Demon Lord, I gotta fulfill my dream. And in his last moments, he's like, I'll just start all over again like I did with Shigaraki. I'll just pass this all for one quirk on to somebody like Izuku and I'll take over their body. And that gave me hope. Not hope that all for one was going to come back, but hope that Izuku would get the all for one quirk. And then maybe he would get back the one for all quirk as well, and then he would have both of them, and then that would just allow him to essentially do anything, I guess, right? Almost anything. Even fix the quirk singularity, which is what my theory was for a while. I thought Horikoshi was going to take even more ideas from Avatar: The Last Airbender than what he already did. I won't spoil what happens at the end of Avatar, even though it's like over 10 years. No, almost 20 years old at this point, but you should really watch Avatar if you haven't. Horikoshi borrowed a lot from that series. I mean, a lot. Which I don't think he's actually openly admitted to, surprisingly, but yeah, I thought Izuku was going to get one for all and all for one, and then, I don't know, do some kind of quirk god stuff to save the world, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Because now that he's finally passed on the last ember with this last punch, and it, dwindling away and dying along with all for one at the end of this chapter, I think Izuku is completely quirkless. So I don't know what Izuku is going to do after this. I know I keep going back to Endeavor's vision of the future that he saw when he was fighting against All For One like 2 years ago. And he saw like Bakugo, who had like Ed Shot's braid in the back of his hair, and we saw like Izuku with an updated costume that had like Gran Torino's cape with like another cape attached to it. So unless that was kind of just like what could have been or what literally was, it seems like Izuku will be a hero after this, but I really don't know what's going to happen because he's quirkless essentially at this point, right? Unless his body like retains strength from One For All, but he just doesn't have the One For All quirk. So essentially he's just like as powerful as like, I don't know, Death Arms or something, but he just doesn't have the god tier level of power that One For All was giving him maybe. Kind of like when you take steroids for a while and you still retain like the tissue that it gave you to some extent, even though your hormonal profile isn't jacked and beefed up the way that it was with the artificial hormones that it was giving you. But anyway, as All For One is dying, he's going even more into his emo mode, and he's kind of becoming pathetic here because he's like, all I wanted to see was Yoichi. I'm sad that Yoichi's gone now. Yoichi's brother, we're talking about the final ember coming through with this punch here. It's like the last semblance of Yoichi representing the One For All quirk itself, like fully dissipating. And this is just confusing to me because All For One kind of cared about Yoichi at some point because, it was always just him and his brother. Like they were born of the mother who was the first quirk user, essentially the first person to have a quirk. She was a quote-unquote Lady of the Night. Can't really get too much into details on that, but you know what I'm talking about. They actually changed it in the volume release. Like, when that chapter was released in the, Shonen Jump magazine, they called her like a Lady of the Night, which means, it means other things. She does things for money, or that was the implication. And then they just changed it in the volume to like, no, she's not that. She was just some lady. But because she died giving birth to One For All and Yoichi, it was kind of just them as kids. So that was like the only thing that All For One had. But then later on, he just killed him. Like once the whole battle between One For All and All For One started really happening, he just killed Yoichi, and he didn't really seem to care too much about it. And now he's just like, oh, I always wanted my brother, Yoichi. And it's like, shut up, dude. It's like, I know that All For One is trying to be portrayed as pathetic here, because even Izuku calls him like a lonely man, because that's essentially what he always was. But man, it is truly pathetic, his ending here, for someone who was built up literally the entire series to be the end-all be-all. But I don't know, I guess that's what Horikoshi wanted. But as All For One is like dying here, we see like everyone coming together because Shigaraki is also coming out of the shadows here. And we see like Shigaraki, or the aspect of his consciousness or something, along with Izuku and the other vestiges of One For all coming together and like colliding in this punch. And this punch is taking out All For One. So he's gone now. And Shigaraki is back. He's taken over the body again. And apparently what was keeping Shigaraki alive was the vestige of Nana. Because, we saw the rest of the remaining vestiges being transferred forcibly. And it was some point after that when All For One took over and, like, quote-unquote ate Shigaraki's consciousness. But no, it was Nana that stayed with him and helped him stay connected without him completely disappearing. Now, It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see that. I was kind of waiting for the moment in the series where Nana was going to have like her one-on-one talk with Shigaraki, which they really didn't have. So it's surprising that Horikoshi just off-paneled that. I don't know, maybe he's rushing to the end here. Not really sure. But she did save, quote-unquote, Shigaraki in the end here, at least from completely dying so that he can have his final character arc. But also, another thing that I forgot to mention was Shirakumo / Kurogiri coming through here. He teleports at like the last minute in between Izuku and Shigaraki, and he's like pleading to All For One for like, hey, give Shigaraki back, his friends are waiting for him. And then he just dies. So yeah, I guess that's also the end of Shirakumo / Kurogiri. We're not getting Shirakumo back. He forever ended his life as the Kurogiri Nomu thing that was created by Yujiko and All For One, and it just goes back into his programming, because he was like programmed to be the protector of Shigaraki, even till the end here. Although he did still have somewhat of his consciousness, because he calls out to present Mike and Aizawa, and he's like, sorry guys, but you know, thanks anyway, but yeah, he's dead too. But anyway, now that it's just Shigaraki left with his body that's disappearing, we get the final conversation between him and Izuku. And this is where Shigaraki just completely gives in to the narrative that Izuku was painting for him. Like, he no longer is like, I'm just beyond repair, I'm gonna destroy everything. He's just like, nope, you know what, Izuku, you were right. I actually didn't destroy anything, and that deep down inside I was just a crying boy, like you thought this whole time. That's why I couldn't destroy your own hands. It was like All For One that essentially did that. But Izuku's like, yeah, I continued to fight because I couldn't forgive what you had done, but I also just wanted you to stop, and I wanted your sadness to be over. So, yeah, that's the conclusion here, with Shigaraki saying like, hey, if Spinner's still alive, tell him that Tomura Shigaraki fought to destroy until the very end, which he didn't, but I guess it's comforting for Spinner, which I guess means Spinner is going to survive this, which is cool, because Spinner deserves to live, if any of them do. The last time I think we saw Spinner was like when his fight with Shoji resolved, where he was essentially brain dead almost, because Yujiko and All For One like put multiple quirks in him so that he would be like, you know, a big factor in this final battle. It made him like giant and have super strength and all this stuff, and it really messed with his brain. So maybe he will survive this. Maybe they could do something to help him possibly, but this makes me think that he's going to survive. Still unknown if Toga and Dabi are going to live through this, but considering that Shigaraki is dying here, they'll probably die as well, since they're like the big trio and they all kind of connected from damaged childhoods. But yeah, after Shigaraki and Izuku have like this final talk here, where Shigaraki just accepts his fate and is like, yeah, Izuku, I was just a crying boy, thanks for saving me. The crying boy referring to Tenko, who Shigaraki originally was, before All For One, like, you know, gave him the Decay quirk and made him kill his family accidentally and bring him up as his new vessel to contain All For One. His entire life stolen from him. He essentially was always just Tenko, which we continually saw throughout the series being represented as like this trapped aspect of his mind. But Shigaraki's body is like completely dissolving here, and at the end of the chapter he's just completely gone. He's turned to dust. So it's like, what happened to Tenko? What was the point of all that stuff? And why is Shigaraki's final moment and character arc being wrapped up here in just 2 pages? I'm just confused by all this. I'm not saying it's bad. It's more so just par of the course with how Horikoshi has been writing lately. I wish I had more to say about this, but it just is what it is. It's a little anticlimactic. I'm not saying that there needed to be like a United States of Smash and everything blows up and then, I don't know, Izuku does something to bring Tenko back, even though I thought that was going to happen. I don't need it to happen. I'm just confused as to why it's just suddenly wrapping up this way. But it is what it is. Again, going back to the quirk singularity, I don't know how that's going to be resolved, even if it is. The quirk singularity theory is that eventually quirks will just keep getting stronger and stronger until the point of where they will be uncontrollable by all people, and it will lead to the apocalypse. Like, just imagine, like, Ares' quirk, but, like, even more powerful, and multiple people have it, and it just keeps getting to the point of where, you know, all life ends because of that. Because we saw that Ares was unable to control her quirk, you know, growing up and whatnot, so it's still a thing. It's not like it's just gonna go away, but maybe just the ending of the series is like, yeah, we'll work towards mitigating that, and we'll find a way to make it work. Again, not sure what they're gonna do. Izuku is technically quirkless at this point, but yeah, like I said at the beginning, we probably only have 2 or 3 chapters left, right? Maybe even less than that, possibly. Of course, the series could continue. There's a few things, in my opinion, that Horikoshi could take in the direction to continue the series. It doesn't even have to be like a Boruto sequel or like a Shippuden sequel or something like that. It can just continue it organically with quite a few options, but maybe I'll make another video about that after the series is over, saying how he could have continued it. But yeah, let me know what you think about this in the comments, guys. This is the end of the final battle and the resolution of Shigaraki. He just kind of accepts what it is, and then that's it. If you liked the video, please give it a like. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.